Chapter 1647. A moment later, Chinyu and shopkeeper Zhou walked down to the second floor. At this time, Little Meaty had chosen 2 more items. Shopkeeper Zhou glanced at them and smiled. The honored guest is upstairs. If you sell something good to our Shiyu shop, including the Sun Moon Stone, we will give you a 30% discount. Little Meaty didn't comment. She didn't care about these things at all. Chinyu had a good impression of this shrewd shopkeeper Zhou. He smiled and nodded. After paying the money and taking the items, the master and servants were about to leave. Shopkeeper Zhou patted his head and smiled. 3 guests, please wait a moment. I almost forgot something. Su Zhuo carried a wooden box and walked over. It was completely sealed, and there was only a single hole for an arm to pass through. Faint traces of light shimmered on its surface, releasing the aura of spells. Shopkeeper Zhou explained, every time the county city's Lantern Festival is held, in order to cater to the Lord County Governor and also to let our guests enjoy themselves, our stores usually prepare some small prizes. As long as a customer buys something, they can draw once. The item isn't too precious. It's just pure entertainment. Little Meaty definitely wouldn't do anything, and Baiji was even more so. Chinyu did it himself. He reached into the wooden box that was clearly sealed and couldn't be sensed by divine sense. He took out a white bead. After this object left the wooden box, it shattered on its own. A long red dress appeared from thin air, its surface overflowing with brilliant light. Su Zhiruo gasped. She couldn't help but widen her eyes. Shopkeeper Zhou forced a smile. I actually regret reminding you of this on my own initiative. He pointed at the red dress that unfolded on its own in the air as if it was worn by a beauty. There are thousands of similar beads in this wooden box in Shiyu's shop, but there is only one red dress, and the probability of it being picked is so small that it's almost negligible. As he spoke, he couldn't help but reveal a bit of heartache deep in his eyes. In terms of true value, this red dress was likely equal to the sum of the 3 items he sold before. This was no longer just a small prize. Chinyu thought for a moment and said, I gave you a discount before, so it's not good to take advantage of shopkeeper Zhou. I will draw again, but leave the red dress behind. Shopkeeper Zhou hurriedly waved his hand. How could that be? Shiyu's store has been open for hundreds of years, and we value reputation the most. Since your luck is good, the red dress is yours. Chinyu smiled and didn't say anything else. He cupped his hands together and said, then many thanks. After retrieving the red dresses, the 3 of them left Shiyu's shop. Shopkeeper Zhou personally saw them off and waved goodbye, his face full of heartache. Now he truly regretted putting the red dress into the wooden box. The only thing that Zhang Xian felt gratified about was the fact that it was extremely rare to get 3 clearance tokens. He would be able to earn a huge sum of money if he succeeded. However, time was tight, and he had to get it done as soon as possible to avoid delaying his business. Chinyu reached out a hand and placed the red dress in front of Little Meaty. I'm a man, so I have no use for this dress. I'll give it to you. Meaty rolled her eyes. You casually drew a prize, and you even pushed it away. Now you're giving it to me? Do you think I'll take anything? Chinyu arched an eyebrow. I don't want it. Then I can only look for a chance to sell it. It's a decent robe. Oomph. Little Meaty took it. You still want to sell it? How much do you owe me now? Let me remind you, don't think of reneging on your debt just because we have a good relationship. Consider this red dress as offsetting the interest. I'll slowly settle things with you in the future. Chinyu smiled and nodded. All right. He looked up at the sky. It's already so late. Shouldn't we find a place to stay first? Although there isn't a curfew in the East Pole County City, sleeping on the streets isn't good. Little Meaty stretched out. I've already chosen a place. Let's find a place to sit down and wait a moment. She casually pointed. The wine's fragrance is average. It's barely edible. The master and servant trio entered. The restaurant that Little Meaty had chosen was certainly good in appearance, since it was able to open on the main road of the county city. The young waiter was clean and nimble. He greeted the 3 guests with a smile and asked what they wanted to eat. But in the end, only 2 people sat down. Baiji stood beside Little Meaty, her expression calm and composed. Just bring up some food, and 2 jugs of your best wine. Very well, please wait a moment. The young waiter turned and left, without any hesitation. The wine and dishes were soon served. Most of the food was simple, but it didn't lack elegance. 2 jugs of old wine were opened and a fragrant aroma wafted out. But to the 2 people who were used to drinking wine and fruit, it was only somewhat edible. They drank 2 mouthfuls and casually picked up some food. Before Chin, you could mention anything about the pass token, there was a quarrel from the upper floor of the restaurant. The sound wasn't small, but it soon became even louder. Both sides began a fight, and the restaurant was filled with cheers. It was clear that those watching weren't afraid of things getting out of hand. With a loud bang, a window shattered and a person fell to the ground, vomiting blood. It seemed that his injuries weren't light. Shwa, shwa. Several more figures rushed out, hurriedly helping up their companions. The people chasing after them all had icy cold faces and thick killing intent. A white-clothed figure flashed and landed on the ground. He opened his folding fan and fanned himself a few times. He sneered and said, "Where did these little brats come from? You dare to cause trouble in the East Pole County City? Today I will let you know what it means to say that there is always a higher heaven." This was the second young master of the Lee family who had competed for the Sun Moonstone in Shiyu's shop, Li Yuantai. As this person appeared, several more figures appeared. They supported the young man who had been knocked down and was vomiting blood, surrounding him. The Lee family's young master. TSK, this group of foreigners. Of all people they could offend, I'm afraid they're going to suffer today. In our county city, who dares to not give the Lee family some face? Even if this matter reaches the Lord County Governor, I doubt they will have a good ending. Seeing that the Lee family was about to attack, a young man in the crowd clenched his teeth and walked out. He cupped his hands together and said, "Second young master Lee, I am Su Xianglin. I am running errands for Mr. Sunday. They are discussing a transaction with me and can be considered Mr. Sun's guests. I ask that second young master Lee show mercy and not lower yourself to their level." Li Yuantai's lips curled up. Mr. Sun's people? Su Xianglin's heart shrank. He braced himself and nodded. After being kicked away, Li Yuantai coldly sneered. "A dog of Sun Yushui dares to bark in front of me, so I kicked him to teach him a lesson." 2 people rushed out and began to punch and kick. Although they didn't kill him, they weren't light either. Soon, Su Xianglin vomited blood. "Brother!" With a scream, Su Zhuo, who had changed her clothes, rushed over. "Why are you hitting him? Let go of my brother." Li Yuantai lifted his hand, a smile on his face. "Oh, so it's little sister Su. This is truly a case of water rushing against the temple of the Dragon King. One family doesn't recognize another. What are you 2 standing around for? Hurry up and help young Master Su up. If he is really injured, I will cut off your heads." Su Zhuo helped her brother up. As she looked at his pale face and the blood stains on his mouth and nose, tears began to flow from her eyes. She cried out with reddened eyes, "The county city is a place of law. The Lord County Governor will definitely not allow you to act as you please." Li Yuantai narrowed his eyes and his smile became even wider. "We didn't hurt him for no reason. It was your brother who wanted to stir up trouble. Little sister Su, don't speak nonsense. If you ruin the Lee family's reputation, then it will be difficult for me to deal with you." He took 2 steps forward and reached out a hand. "How about little sister Su come with me to the mansion today, and we can clearly discuss this matter. If we can talk things out, then we will still be a family. Today's minor matter can be put behind us, and I won't pursue it any further. Don't touch my little sister." Su Xianglin struggled to move forward. With a loud bang, he was sent flying away. A jade pendant fell from Li Yuantai's body and broke into 2 pieces. He looked down at it and frowned, a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Young Master Su, this is your problem. This jade pendant is an ancestral heirloom of my Li family. Although the quality is average, it is of great significance. To my Li family, it is an object that cannot be bought with money. Today, it was destroyed by your hands. If you can't give me an explanation, then I fear that even little sister Su will lose face." Su Zhuo supported her big brother. She couldn't help but reveal a flustered expression. You clearly dropped it yourself. My big brother didn't even touch you. Li Yuantai lightly said, Little sister Sue, although I like you, I cannot allow you to slander me. Our county city is a place governed by law. If someone tries to steal a treasure, they must compensate for it. You must understand this. Su Xianglin clenched his teeth. Young Master Li, please state your price. Li Yuantai glanced at him, his lips curling up in a smile. This piece of jade is really expensive. Are you sure you can afford it? Or do you want to pay with your life? As the Su siblings were driven into a corner, a master and two servants were watching from the window on the second floor of the restaurant. Speaking of which, the two parties involved in the conflict were actually people who barely knew each other in the East Pole County city. There was no need to mention Li Yuantai and Su Zhuo. They had just parted ways, and Su Xianglin and those youths had met once at the summit of the East Pole Mountain. Little Meaty had also commented that her words were sour, but also reasonable. If one considered it from this perspective, today's conflict was truly fated with them. Qinyu glanced at the calm Little Meaty. She never did things without a reason, and she didn't like to be entangled with people she didn't care about. Her behavior in the shop today had been very strange. But since she didn't say anything about this matter, Qinyu thought about it for a moment. Then, he faintly smiled and continued to watch. In this world, there were far too many people who weren't peaceful. It was impossible to manage all of them. Otherwise, if there were endless and monstrous karma involved, then even a true heaven master would be forcefully broken apart. Stop! The young man who was being supported by a friend was the one who had spoken up at the summit and then invited Su Xianglin to drink after being reminded. He struggled to stand up, a hint of struggle in his eyes. He slowly said, Today's matter has nothing to do with the Su siblings. Let them go. Li Yuantai coldly sneered. Take care of yourself first. Chila, the young man tore off his clothes at his chest. The air suddenly fell silent. On the young man's slightly sunken chest was a birthmark that looked like a fire flood dragon tattoo. Light surged on the surface of the scales, as if it would come alive at any moment and break out from his body. The Yang family's fire flood dragon. With a cry of alarm, the entire audience fell deathly silent. Countless people stared with wide eyes at the scene in front of them. They felt that today's commotion had really gone too far. Li Yuantai's complexion stiffened, and he stopped waving his fan. He stared at the fire flood dragon tattoo on the young man's chest. After determining that it wasn't fake, his lips curved up and he squeezed out a smile. Brothers of the Yang family, I know most of you today. I am truly sorry. He simply admitted defeat on the spot. It wasn't that Li Yuantai wasn't tough enough, but that facing the Yang family of the county city, he didn't have the qualifications to do so. If he didn't admit defeat, he feared he would have to accept his fate. Chapter 1648. East Extreme County City's Li family was certainly a resounding name, but the Yang family was even stronger. Simply put, when a Lord County Governor held a banquet, the Li family would definitely have a prominent seat. But as long as the Yang family didn't arrive, no one dared to eat at this banquet. The difference was roughly like this. Having a lifelike fire flood dragon on his chest meant that he was a direct descendant of the Yang family. This was something everyone in the East Extreme County knew. With the sudden appearance of this unfamiliar Yang family disciple, there was no way for Li Yuantai to continue this conflict after he admitted defeat. It could be said that the conflict had come to a screeching halt at the climax. The restaurant owner, who didn't want to offend the Li family, was now wiping away his cold sweat and begging for mercy. He kowtowed again and again, his face full of fear and despair. A direct descendant of the Yang family had been beaten up by Li Yuantai in his restaurant to the point of vomiting 3 liters of blood. Disregarding what price the Li family would pay for this, as the landlord on the surface, he wouldn't be able to escape being implicated. It was impossible for the boss behind him to plead with the Yang family for his sake. He feared that they wanted nothing more than to wash away all responsibility and have him quickly die. Interesting. Little Meaty's lips curved up in a cold sneer. But he didn't know what she meant by interesting. There was no more fun to watch. Qinyu didn't know what she wanted to do next, So he took advantage of this time to close his eyes and cultivate. Pretending to sleep wasn't as good as real sleep, but it was still beneficial. It was better than nothing. He closed his eyes and opened them again. After an unknown period of time, his aura stirred, and he turned his head to look outside. After listening for a bit, he realized that someone from the Yang family had come. They didn't act out on the spot, nor did they act too overbearingly. As for the restaurant owner, who had a mournful face as if he were grieving the death of his parents, they even said a few words of comfort, saying that the ignorant weren't guilty. It was unknown whether they were words of courtesy or if they were truly magnanimous, or if the Yang family didn't have the mind to deal with these matters right now. After all, a true direct descendant of the Yang family had suddenly popped out of nowhere. This was the first matter they had to deal with first. The Yang family led their people away. Li Yuantai also lowered his head and obediently followed behind a Li family elder, walking away from the crowd. He didn't know if it was a coincidence, but before he left, he looked up and saw the master and servants sitting by the window on the second floor. He glanced at Li Yuantai and then lowered his head without any expression. But Qin, you could still feel the ruthlessness in Li Yuantai's heart from his eyes. After the main character left, the onlookers dispersed as well. As for Su Xianglin, who was beaten to the point of vomiting blood, no one paid any attention to him. The county governor's manor had remained silent about what had happened at the Lantern Festival. To a certain extent, this was the best decision to make. As for whether some people would lose confidence and trust in the prefectural governor's manor because of this, it did not matter. After all, they were just some insignificant people. Su Zhiruo bit her lip. "Brother, let's go see the doctor." Su Xianglin waved his hand and squeezed out a smile. "I'm fine. I'm a tough guy. I don't need to see a doctor. I'll be fine after a nap." "Brother, I made some money today. Listen to me, you must see a doctor first." Su Xianglin hesitated for a moment before nodding. But before the brother and sister could go far, they were stopped by someone. Su Xianglin's complexion changed. He clenched his teeth and stood in front of his little sister. But soon, he heard his little sister's surprised voice. "3 guests, They were his little sister's guests. Su Xianglin's heart tightened and then relaxed. In addition to the fact that his injuries weren't as simple as they seemed on the surface, his vision darkened and he fainted. "Brother!" Su Zhiruo cried out in alarm. "Don't be in such a hurry to cry. He isn't dead yet." Little Meaty paused for a moment before continuing. "But without accident, he will die soon. Don't speak nonsense. My brother was just beaten up by someone. He has fought countless times since he was young, and he has always been in a much more miserable state than this. But he has always been able to quickly recover." Su Zhiruo quickly refuted. Meaty smiled. "Then how about we make a bet? If he doesn't die in an hour, I will give you that red dress." Su Zhiruo's complexion changed, and sorrow filled her heart. She had an approximate idea of the price of that dress that caused shopkeeper Zhou's heart to ache. Since Little Meaty said this, she naturally had confidence that if something were to happen to her brother, she would be all alone in this world with no family. Large tears tumbled down her cheeks. She lifted a hand to wipe them away and supported Su Xianglin, preparing to find the medical hall for treatment. "If you continue to toss him around like this, he won't even last a quarter hour." Su Zhiruo stiffened. She placed her brother on the ground and knelt down. "I beg you, please save my brother. As long as I can save him, I am willing to do anything." He couldn't help but rub his nose. He thought to himself that this girl was quite unreasonable. Why did she look at him when she spoke? Little Meaty's lips curved up. "Lend us your courtyard for a few days. Consider it our reward for helping you." She blinked. "Don't refuse." "When you stepped into Shiyu's shop, weren't you all talking about this when you were together?" Su Zhiruo paled. She glanced at her unconscious brother on the ground, and then at the master and servants across from her. She clenched her teeth and nodded. "Fine." Leading a wolf into the house. How many times had she seen such a thing happen? But she never imagined that it would be her turn today. Moreover, even though she knew this was the case, she had no other choice. Qin coughed, but before he could speak, he was interrupted by Little Meaty. "Lead the way." Su Zhiruo bit her lips. She glanced at Su Xianglin. Little Meaty lightly said, "Don't worry. Since I am here, he won't die." Su Zhiruo took a deep breath. She helped her brother up and staggered forward to lead the way. Baiji stepped forwards on her own initiative and helped her support Su Xianglin. Little Meaty's eyes flashed. She thought that this stupid woman had finally opened up a little. In the capital city, the Su family had a small and shabby courtyard. It looked ordinary, but when one pushed open the door, one could see that it was a completely different world. The courtyard occupied a considerable area, and there was even an old pagoda tree in the courtyard. It looked like it had lived for many years, and its branches and leaves were luxuriant. There were many rooms. The brother and sister each had their own room, and the rest were empty. Although there wasn't much furniture, it was still clean and tidy. It seemed that the brother and sister would occasionally clean the courtyard. After helping Su Xianglin settle down, Su Zhiruo hurriedly said, "This is my home. You can live wherever you want. Can you save my brother now?" Little Meaty looked at Baiji. She quickly bowed. "Madam, I can kill people, but I don't know how to save people." Qin Yu waved his hand. "Don't look at me. My strength isn't stable right now. If there are any twists and turns, saving people will become killing people." "Umph." Little Meaty coldly sneered. Her complexion wasn't too good. She walked over to the bed and lifted a hand, tapping Su Xianglin's forehead like a bolt of lightning. She turned and walked away. She took out a white gauze and began to wipe her fingers. "It's enough. He will sleep for several days, and then he will wake up." Seeing this, Su Zhiruo couldn't help but widen her eyes. Fear rose in her heart. Could she have been tricked? How could someone save someone like this? This was far too childish. Fortunately, Su Xianglin, who was lying on the bed, had not woken up yet, but his breathing had calmed down, and his pale face had regained some color. This allowed Su Zhiruo to truly let out a sigh of relief. But as she thought about what she would face next, she felt a deep sorrow in her heart. But what would come. She couldn't avoid it. She just couldn't figure out why this person would act like this when he clearly had a beautiful wife and maid by his side. Or was it that all men in the world were like this? It was just like her father. Because of his dissolute nature, he had finally provoked a calamity and caused his family to be ruined and killed. Little Meaty looked at her and lightly said, "I've already saved him. I'm tired today, so let's rest early." Su Zhiruo's complexion paled even further. Her body shivered. I'm going to freshen up." She fled in distress. Qin Yu let out a deep sigh. He rubbed his eyebrows. "Little Meaty, this isn't good." Little Meaty arched an eyebrow. "I think it's good. Do you have an opinion?" Qin Yu nodded earnestly. Little Meaty coldly sneered. "Endure it." At this moment, Baiji felt that her madam was valiant and heroic. All daughters of the world should be like this. Of course, she didn't dare to reveal this too obviously. She only dared to keep this in her heart, lest she somehow anger her madam. It didn't matter if she was slapped or kicked. But if she were to anger her madam's body, that would be her sin. That night, Su Zhiruo was tormented to the extreme. She lay on her bed, her hands tightly gripping onto the corners of her blanket. Her eyes were wide as she stared at the door, as if in the next moment a big bad wolf would rush in and eat her up. Her eyes were wide open as she stared at the door, as if in the next moment a big bad wolf would rush in and eat her up. The next day, there was a scream from her room. Su Zhiruo crawled up, but she discovered that the door she hadn't locked last night was still closed. Her clothes were still neat and tidy. She carefully felt around and didn't find anything different. Then, she let out a long breath. In a room far away, Qin Yu opened his eyes, a bitter smile on his face. He shook his head and closed his eyes once more. In such a situation, what could he do? Should he walk over and seriously tell this Miss Su that she shouldn't be dreaming and that he wasn't interested in her at all? At that time, what would he do if this young lady flew into a rage out of shame? Little Meaty would also be annoyed, and he would ruin her interest in watching a play. It was rare for Little Meaty to act so recklessly, and it wasn't a major matter, so he let her be. From this day onwards, the Su family had 3 more guests who didn't pay rent. Su Xianglin was still unconscious, But Su Zhuo gradually relaxed. This was because she could clearly see that her big brother's condition was improving little by little. That madam's words were likely trustworthy. But that man, just what did he mean? Su Zhuo blushed red. After thinking about it for a moment, she couldn't help but pinch herself. She thought that it was far too shameless for a virgin girl to think about such things. But why? She had been right on the edge of his lips for several days now, but he didn't seem to have any intention of biting her. Had she been wrong from the start? If that was really the case, then she would really die of shame. After hesitating for a while, Su Zhuo saw that the master and servants weren't evil people, so she found a madam who liked to sit under the locust tree in the courtyard and drink wine while looking at the sky. She carefully asked a few questions. In the end, it seemed that the madam had seen through her thoughts, and with one sentence, she was so scared that her face turned pale. "Oh, you're talking about this matter. There's no hurry. He needs to wait for a special time before he can bear bite you." Su Zhuo didn't even know how she returned to her room. Not only was her hope dashed, but she also heard even more frightening news. What was a special time? This made Su Zhuo subconsciously think of the many horror stories she had heard before, and the female protagonists in those stories mostly had tragic endings. The categories were probably nothing more than harvesting yin to nourish yang, refining cauldrons, and sacrificing yin and yang. The more she thought about it, the more terrified she became. Finally, she couldn't help but burst into tears. In the garden, little Meaty smiled faintly. She thought that this girl's willpower was really strong. She could even endure these things. She had to think of a way to stimulate her emotions. Only like this would she be able to take advantage of the opportunity to see whether what she had seen was right or not. Humph. This fellow Qin, you still had some uses. But as she thought about it, if it weren't for him, then she wouldn't have to go through so much trouble. She would have been able to see through this little girl's depths with a single glance. Her complexion couldn't help but darken. She thought that she deserved to feel so uncomfortable. Chapter 1649. At night, as Qin Yu was cultivating, he heard some faint movements. This time was different from the past. After a moment of hesitation, he pushed open the door and entered the courtyard. Little Meat was already in the courtyard. She was standing beneath a large scholar tree, looking at Su Zhuo's room. The girl should have been awakened by pain after falling asleep. He didn't know if it was because she had experienced this before, or if she was worried that there was an unwelcome guest in her home, but she didn't dare to make too much noise. The suppressed moans were very weak. If it weren't for a cultivator's amazing hearing, it would have been nearly impossible to hear. Qin Yu looked at Little Meat and pointed to the room. "Did you deliberately provoke this girl because you wanted to see this?" Little Meat nodded, not hiding anything at all. "If I didn't see clearly, how would I know whether or not I should make a deal with her?" Qin Yu said, "Did you see clearly now?" Little Meat lightly said, "I did. Is it worth the deal?" "Of course it is." Meaty raised her head and glanced at the pitch-black sky above her. A hint of coldness appeared at the corners of her lips. But such a good deal is laid out in the open. There might not be anyone who completely understands it, but that doesn't stop people from bidding. Qin Yu thought for a moment. He furrowed his eyebrows. "Are you saying that we ruined someone's plans?" Little Meat coldly sneered. "No, it's that someone is blind and wants to die here." Although the Su family's residence was in dire straits, its location wasn't bad. There was a main street in front of the entrance. During the day, there were people coming and going. The shops on both sides of the street were open for business, and it was quite lively. But in the pitch black of the night, when one couldn't even see their own fingers, there weren't many normal people who would choose to come out at this time. In particular, there were some people who were sneakily lying on the eaves. Only their eyes were exposed as they stared at the courtyard in front of them. Puff! There was an extremely faint sound, nearly inaudible in the dark night. But the flesh and blood of the person's chest, as well as his heart, had already been pierced through. The stalker's eyes widened. His Adam's apple rolled up and down twice, but no sound came out. He died where he stood. Baiji expressionlessly sheathed her sword. Now that she had changed into black clothes, she could come and go without a trace. She turned and vanished into the night. This was not the first person she had killed, and it would not be the last. Walking in the darkness, Baiji harvested one life after another. As for why these people continued to advance wave after wave after wave after wave of death, Baiji didn't care. She didn't care about these people's stories. Madame had asked her to kill all the cultivators who tried to get close to this courtyard. But tonight, there seemed to be something different. Perhaps it was because he had killed too many people previously, causing the other party to be enraged. Finally, an interesting one had arrived. In the dark night, Baiji's eyes lit up. She moved and reappeared on the long street. Opposite him stood a middle-aged man with some white hair on his temples. He held a sword in one hand and exuded an extraordinary aura. "Miss, if you want to chase them away, just show them a little. Why do you have to kill them all?" Baiji took a step forward. "You can ask him yourself." "Ask who?" Of course, it was those who had already been killed by her sword. The white-haired swordsman frowned. He lifted his hand and a beam of dazzling sword light erupted, illuminating most of the county city. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was majestic and vast. But although this sword had started with great momentum, it came to an abrupt halt. It was like a shooting star that streaked across the sky. Even if its brilliance overshadowed the stars, it was destined to last for only an instant. The white hair on his temples fell to his face, revealing a trace of embarrassment. He frowned in pain, but he couldn't understand. A sword could be used like this? Baiji's eyes brightened. "If my madam says it can, then it can." She spat out a mouthful of blood and turned to leave, thinking that she was still too weak. Even if she could force herself to use it, her body wouldn't be able to withstand it. The moment the white-haired swordsman behind her fell to the ground, he turned to dust. The smell of blood filled the air. A single sword strike illuminated half the city. Such a powerful figure was naturally a legendary sword immortal. The entire East Pole County city was shaken. But unfortunately, after this strike, there was no more movement. It was unknown whether it was that sword immortal who had already floated far away after slashing the enemy with his sword. In the latter half of the night, the commotion in the county city continued for a long time before gradually subsiding. But it was destined that some people wouldn't be able to sleep the entire night. County City Leaf Family. On the day of the Lantern Festival, after the inexplicable conflict, everything was calm and tranquil, as if nothing had happened. In the darkness of the night, there were still countless lights in the Leaf family residence, but they couldn't clearly illuminate the entire residence. The shadows were dim, making it seem even more mysterious. The Leaf family members who had woken up at night didn't receive any useful information. They all turned around and left. Because he had woken up at night, Li Yuantai was still angry. He tossed and turned for a while before finally falling into a deep sleep. When the sky was about to brighten, the door of the house in the southeast direction was pushed open with a soft creak. A woman wearing only a gauze dress as thin as a cicada's wings flashed out. Her bare feet made no sound as she walked into the courtyard. She respectfully bowed. "Greetings, my lord." "White hair has failed." The voice of the figure in front of her was calm and without the slightest fluctuation. The woman's body trembled. She looked up with an aghast expression. She was illuminated by a spot of light in the courtyard. She could faintly see that it was the pink-dressed female cultivator who had followed Li Yuantai in Shiyu's shop. At this time, she was nearly completely naked, but she didn't care about it at all. Only her face was pale. Although she didn't know the origins of that sword cultivator, she knew that this person was one of the hidden cards in the Lord's hands. But now, before she could even probe out the other party's depths and roots, she had been directly defeated. The woman took a deep breath and bowed. "What can this subordinate do?" "My lord, please tell me." The figure in front of her said, "We have already investigated. The master and servant came to East Pole City to enter the central wasteland divine continent." She couldn't hear the following words. She could only faintly see his lips opening and closing. Shwa. The black shadow vanished without a trace. The woman turned and returned to her room as if nothing had happened. After another night of fear, Suzhou finally returned to Shiyu's shop with dark circles around her eyes. She had already asked for several days of leave. Her fellow sisters gasped in surprise. They hurriedly asked her what she had been doing these past few days. She looked as if she had overexerted herself. Facing their strange gazes and teasing tones, Suzhou wanted to cry, but no tears came out. But her big brother was still unconscious at home, so she didn't dare to say a single word. With great difficulty, she found an excuse to get rid of them. Suzhou braced herself and went to find the manager on the second floor. According to little Meaty's instructions, she spoke to him. The manager's complexion changed. He glanced at her and said, "Wait here for a moment. I will go and invite the shopkeeper over." Shopkeeper Zhou soon arrived. He brought Su Zhiruo into the room. "Zhiruo, are those guests staying at your place?" Seeing Su Zhiruo nod, shopkeeper Zhou looked her up and down, a thoughtful look in his eyes. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Zhiruo, I watched you grow up, so I have some words of advice for you. If you can obtain some practical benefits, don't think about the future. People always have to look at where they stand." He could only remind her of this. As for whether or not Su Zhiruo could sense it and comprehend it, that was her own problem. After all, the other party only wanted 3 clearance tokens. This hadn't changed. Su Zhiruo nodded in confusion. When she left Shiyu's shop and was about to return home, she finally understood the meaning in shopkeeper Zhou's eyes. Her face flushed red with anger and shame. Little Meaty stood at the door, smiling as she waited for her to return. "Little girl, your cheeks are rosy today. You seem to be in good spirits." Su Zhiruo suppressed her anger. Shopkeeper Zhou said that the matter has been completed. The 3 guests can go to Shiyu's shop the day after tomorrow to complete the transaction. She didn't know what they were buying or selling, but from the looks of it, it should be something very valuable. But so what? Her current situation was that of a fish on the chopping block. Besides waiting to be slaughtered, she had no other choice. Su Zhiruo lowered her head and stepped over the threshold. She walked towards Su Xianglin's room. Behind her, little Meaty's teasing voice sounded out. "Thank you, little girl, Su Zhiruo. We have been waiting for you." Su Zhiruo's footsteps were disorderly. Qinyu pushed open the door, a helpless expression on his face. "All right, that's enough. Since you want to make a deal with someone, for better or worse, you should consider the mentality of a little girl." Little Meaty smiled and nodded. Qinyu's complexion changed. He turned and walked away. "Stop." Qinyu coughed. "People have 3 needs." Little Meaty coldly sneered. "Hold it in." She walked over and circled around Qinyu. "Sir Qin, there is something I must make clear to you. The things on Su Zhiruo's body are not for my own use. Do you understand?" Qinyu nodded. "Of course I understand. If there is anything Miss Meaty needs me to do, please feel free to speak." He snapped his fingers and flashed a meaty smile. "You're right." She took a step forward and leaned close to Qinyu's ear. "Tonight, how about we act out a scene where a bully bullies a weak young girl and a beautiful girl comes to his rescue? How about it?" Qinyu's lips twitched. He roughly understood what she meant. He thought for a moment and made a final struggle. "Do you think that Miss Su will believe you in this situation?" Little Meaty waved her hand. "Whether she believes me or not has nothing to do with me. I only want the process." Qinyu choked. He looked at her bright eyes and thought that he couldn't avoid this. He had no idea how he had offended her these past 2 days. He clearly hadn't done anything at all. A woman's heart was like a needle at the bottom of the sea. You couldn't touch it, nor could you guess at it. No matter how much Qinyu sighed, night still arrived. He had been sitting in his room and had wasted half a day of cultivation. He frowned and racked his brains for countless thoughts. Finally, he lifted a hand to his face and clenched his teeth. This was something that would happen sooner or later. There was no need to wait for others to urge him. He stood up and pushed open the door. His back was sorrowful and bleak, as if the wind were howling and the water was cold. Then Qinyu gathered up his courage and pushed open Su Zhiruo's door. He looked at the clearly frightened Miss Su and then at little Meaty, who was frowning and had a strange look in her eyes. Qinyu knew that he had been played, and indeed, with several shouts, Qinyu froze in place. Then, he put on an ashamed expression and turned to flee, leaving little Meaty in the room to comfort the Sioux family girl. He could faintly hear that she was saying, "With Big Sister here, you don't need to be afraid. I won't let him touch you at all." Chin Yu found this strange. Su Zhiruo didn't seem like an idiot. Could it be that she had forgotten what had happened before and had actually believed her words? He was left speechless. However, being scolded a few times was better than having to put on a show of a bully bullying a little white flower. Thinking of this, he calmed himself down. He no longer cared about what little Meaty was planning and returned to his room to continue cultivating. There was nothing he could do about it. This world was just so realistic. If one didn't have a cultivation, then they had no human rights. In order to one day, he had to work even harder. In the room, little Meaty was comforting Su Zhiruo. She glanced at Chin Yu's room and sneered inwardly. "You brat, you have quite the guts. But I probably won't give you that chance. Tonight, I thank Madam for saving me. Before this, Zhiruo had many misunderstandings with Madam. I ask for your forgiveness." Su Zhiruo stood up and respectfully bowed. Little Meaty waved her hand. "It's fine. I am a broad-minded person and have always been magnanimous. I won't lower myself to your level, so don't worry." She lifted a hand and pointed. "But if those beautiful eyes of yours continue to remain on your body, it will definitely be a disaster." Su Zhiruo took a deep breath. She said in a soft voice, "I ask Madam to save me." Little Meaty glanced at the extremely intelligent Sioux family girl in front of her. She faintly smiled and said, "Don't worry, I will definitely help you." Chapter 1650. It was unknown what the two of them spoke about, but when Little Ro left, her face was full of smiles. It was clear she had obtained the results she wanted. Standing beneath a large scholar tree in the courtyard, she glanced at Chin Yu's room. She muttered to herself, "The good fortune bestowed by the heavens is indeed one's greatest blessing. But if this blessing is too great, so great that it surpasses the limits of one's endurance, then holding on to it will kill one." A gust of wind blew past. The old scholar tree swayed, as if it were nodding in agreement. Little Ro patted the old scholar tree. "As expected, you're the most sensible one. It wasn't in vain that I spent these past few days admiring the heavens." In his room, Chin Yu opened his eyes. Little Ro's words were naturally meant for him to hear. She was probably worried that there would be unnecessary burdens. Chin Yu faintly smiled and closed his eyes once more. In truth, Little Ro had underestimated the trust he had in her. There really wasn't a need to explain. Beneath the old scholar tree, Little Ro curled her lips, a bit of disdain on her face. She turned, folded her hands behind her back, and hopped back into her room. They had originally agreed to go to Shiyu's shop the day after tomorrow to complete the customs clearance token. But the truth was that there was a knock on the Su family's door the next day. When Su Zhiruo opened the door, she saw Zhou Yunshan standing outside. "Shopkeeper, how come you are here? Please come in." Zhou Yunshan took a deep breath, a bitter smile on his face. "I came here today to personally apologize to our guest." When Chin Yu heard the commotion, he stopped cultivating and came out on his own initiative. He frowned. "Shopkeeper Zhou, what happened?" Zhou Yunshan quickly walked forwards. He cupped his hands together, an ashamed expression on his face. "Yesterday, our honored guest had Zhiruo return to Shiyu's shop to pass on a message. I asked her to pass on a message, but today there was a sudden change." Su Zhiruo was a smart girl. She turned and returned to her room, leaving space for the two of them. Chin Yu frowned. "Shopkeeper Zhou, please speak clearly." Zhou Yunshan clenched his teeth and lowered his voice. "Our Shiyu shop had already prepared 3 customs clearance tokens and could have received them today. But for some unknown reason, the Yang family suddenly spoke up and took one more." "There were 2 more?" Zhou Yunshan smiled bitterly and shook his head. "There's only 1 piece left. The Li family suddenly took 1 more piece. This was originally a violation of the rules, but with the Yang family taking the lead and the Li family following suit, no one dared to say anything." He cupped his hands together and said, "This time, Shiyu's shop has broken its promise. The deposit will be returned to you, and we will compensate you 3 times the loss. Please forgive us." Qin Yu remained silent. His mood wasn't too good. Right now, the most precious thing to him was time. If they could not obtain the pass, they would have to wait for the next opening of the Jade Gate, which would delay them for at least a month. Compensation would be meaningless. He waved his hand. "Shopkeeper Zhou, have all the passes from the prefecture city been distributed? I wonder if you can tell me if there's anyone who still has some money on hand? We're willing to buy it at a high price." In truth, there was no need for things to be so troublesome. As long as Qin Yu revealed his identity, the county governor's mansion would quickly deliver the pass to him. Let alone 3 or 5, they could even double the amount. After all, this was a highly profitable transaction, and it was being carried out right under the eyes of the county governor's mansion. Qin Yu didn't believe that they weren't secretly involved. But when they entered the central desolate, in order to play it safe, the master and servants had decided from the start that they would not be tainted by the shadow of the Western Desolate Empire. They would purely use their identities as stowaways. This would make it easier for them to act in the future, and they would avoid any future troubles because of a temporary convenience. Thus, there was the matter of Misty concealing their tracks and vanishing from the sight of the Western Desolate. Zhou Yinshan hesitated for a moment. The Li family's second young master, Li Yuantai, announced that he had 2 passes and was willing to sell them. He glanced at Qin Yu. "Guest, you should also be able to see that there is something strange about this matter. But if you say that it was just because of a little conflict in Shi Yu's shop that something like this happened, that doesn't make sense." Shopkeeper Zhou revealed a probing expression. He was likely suspecting that there was some other connection between the two sides. Otherwise, for such an obvious design, it was clear that there was a problem. A sharp light flashed deep in Qin Yu's eyes. He thought back to what Misty had said about someone offering a price. He thought back to when he was in Shi Yu's shop and the conflict that occurred because of the Sun-Moon Stone. There seemed to be a hidden thread here. If it was related to the Li family, then today's matter could be explained. In these past days, Qin Yu hadn't counted how many people Baiji had killed. After the sword cultivator was killed in the middle of the night, there was a day of peace and quiet. But the other side clearly hadn't given up. They simply changed their routine and started over. His thoughts raced. Qin Yu slowly said, "Let's not talk about the deposit for now. I asked shopkeeper Zhou to pass on a message and ask that second young masterly whether or not he is willing to sell the 2 passes in his hands." Zhou Yinshan hesitated. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. Qin Yu smiled. He waved his hand and said, "Don't worry, this is my decision. No matter what the result is, it will not implicate Shiyu's shop." After his thoughts were seen through, Zhou Yinshan revealed an awkward expression. In the end, he was a seasoned character and soon composed himself. "Thank you for your understanding. In truth, we businessmen don't want to be entangled in a vortex of trouble." He took a deep breath and said, "Shiyu's shop would do its best to help you deal with this matter. Before nightfall, there will be news." Zhou Yinshan bid his farewells and left. Qin Yu stood beneath the large scholar tree. His eyes narrowed, and other thoughts flashed through his mind. For instance, the Yang family's sudden move. For instance, how did the Li family know that they just happened to need 3 passes? The meaning behind all of this was different as he thought about it. Even the sincere and ashamed shopkeeper Zhou that had revealed a trace of so-called magnanimity before leaving seemed a bit ridiculous and laughable. "Shiyu's shop? Interesting." Misty pushed open the door and walked over to the old scholar tree. She looked up at the skies and lightly said, "For this matter, it's normal for there to be an accident. If things really went smoothly, then I wouldn't think it appropriate." Qin Yu earnestly said, "Kill less people. This time we're going out to do something great. If we cause too much noise, that would be bad." Misty nodded. "Don't worry. I have more experience than you in dealing with this sort of matter." As expected, before the skies darkened, another person came to Shiyu's shop. This time it wasn't shopkeeper Zhou but a steward. According to what he said, shopkeeper Zhou was suddenly tied down by some matters and had sent him to apologize to the 3 guests. He also insisted on returning the 3 times deposit. The steward said that the Leaf family's second young master wasn't sincere at all. If the three guests weren't in a hurry, they could patiently wait a month and Shiyu's shop would surely obtain 3 passes and sell them to them at a 10% discount. Xinyu waved his hand. We are in a hurry, so I asked the steward to directly state what second young master Li's offer is. The steward hesitated for a moment. He forced a smile and said, Li Yuantai said that the passes can be traded, but he wants Madame and her maid to personally speak with him tonight. The price can be negotiated. Xinyu narrowed his eyes. The steward's breath caught in his throat. His face paled and a look of horror appeared in his eyes. Although this feeling passed in an instant, the steward still revealed a deep awe in his eyes. He was a bit puzzled. Although the Li family had always been overbearing in their actions, most of them had a sense of propriety. So, why did they act so recklessly this time? In particular, this guest in front of him was clearly not someone they could provoke. He had immediately sensed this, so how could the Li family not know? But these matters weren't something that a steward of Shiyu's shop like him had the qualifications to ponder and explore. He could only pretend that he didn't know. Go back and tell shopkeeper Zhou to tell Li Yuantai that we agree to his request. Misty pushed open the door, her expression calm. Xinyu frowned. Before he could speak, he was interrupted by her glare. The steward wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He didn't dare to stay any longer. He bowed and hurried away. I don't think it's appropriate, Xinyu said. Misty curled her lips. What's inappropriate about it? She looked Xinyu up and down several times. You shouldn't be worried about your face, right? Or do you think I care about such a minor matter? A minor matter. Xinyu coughed, not speaking. But the meaning behind his eyes was clear. If you really don't care, why are you saying such things? I haven't even said anything yet. Misty coldly sneered. You don't need to worry about this matter. I will naturally handle it. As for the Su family's little girl, watch her well tonight. Don't let anything happen to her, otherwise it will be your own problem. Xinyu nodded. He thought for a moment and earnestly said, Don't forget what I told you before. Don't cause too much of a ruckus. Misty turned and left. You talk too much. Leaf family. After receiving the message from Shiyu's shop, Li Yuantai was stunned. He didn't think that they would agree so easily. Originally, this was only a pretense. He had prepared many other methods to amuse these 3 outsiders so that they could truly experience the hospitality of the Li family. The pink-dressed female cultivator moved closer to his ear and whispered a few words. Li Yuantai thought for a moment and then smiled. Good. Since they have agreed, then send someone to invite them. If they really can let me enjoy myself tonight, then I won't mind giving them the pass. As he spoke, he reached out and pinched the pink-dressed female cultivator's round and tight bottom. You aren't allowed to leave tonight either. This young master wants to hold a grand banquet to appreciate all the beauties. This caused the pink-dressed female cultivator to pout. She hugged him and swayed back and forth. Li Yuantai laughed out loud, as if he didn't notice the cold chill that appeared deep in her eyes. And in fact, the pink-dressed female cultivator also didn't notice that as Li Yuantai laughed, there was a mocking smile on his face. He wasn't a fool. He naturally noticed all the strange things happening around him. But the people of the Li family, including his parents and his big brother, all turned a blind eye to this. What would he do? Of course, he could only play along with everyone else. Being a marionette in the hands of others wasn't something that made one happy. But life was like this. How could everything go according to one's heart? After obtaining the status of the Li family's second young master, he could enjoy a life of pleasure. Why would he ask for more? It was rare for him to be confused. A small red sedan stopped outside the Su family's gates. Little Ruru brought Baiji out and sat down. Lift the sedan, a steward of the Li family shouted out. He smiled and turned to look at Xinyu at the door. He respectfully said, Mister, please rest assured. My family's young master has said that he will deliver the madams and madams back in good condition tomorrow morning. You should rest early. Xinyu narrowed his eyes. Hiding behind the door, Su Zhuo's eyes widened with disbelief. In particular, as she saw Xinyu not moving at all, she couldn't help but reveal a look of disdain. That's right. In her opinion, the three guests of her family were indeed unusual. But so what? The one who came tonight was the Leaf family steward. After entering that great mansion, even if they had transcendent abilities, they wouldn't be able to display them. They could only be fish on the chopping block. Chinyu turned and met the eyes of the Su family's young miss. He nodded and walked away. "Hey!" Su Jiruo shouted. Chinyu stopped and turned his head, a puzzled look in his eyes. Su Jiruo clenched her teeth. "Although I don't know what you want to do or what you are relying on, if your madam and maid enter the Li family, they will definitely suffer grievances. You should clearly consider this." Chinyu smiled. "Thank you for your concern." He walked away. After several steps, he stopped. "Tonight, there might be some movement. Miss Su, you should stay in your room." Su Jiruo's eyes widened. She had already explained the situation so clearly, and yet this person was still in the mood to say such things. Movement? What movement? To see you howl in pain in the middle of the night and hit your head against a tree? What sort of man was this? Even if there really was something going on, he should be the one taking the lead. What sort of ability was having a woman go out to shield herself from the wind and rain? Chapter 1651. Returning to his room, Chinyu rubbed his nose, a helpless smile on his lips. He didn't know how deep the Leaf family's mansion was or what sort of cards they were hiding, but they would soon understand what it meant to invite a god in, but send him away. Chinyu had never worried about Meaty. Even if she had lost something, it wasn't something that a mere Leaf family could shake. But in life, there were many paths beneath one's feet. Since it was one's own choice, they would have to bear the corresponding price. Chinyu shook his head and closed his eyes to cultivate. But for some reason, the Leaf family steward's eyes kept appearing in his mind, like a mosquito that wouldn't budge. He opened his eyes and let out a deep breath. As he thought, his heart cultivation was lacking. Even such a minor matter was placed in front of him. But in truth, the fundamental reason was that Chinyu placed Meaty in a very important position in his heart. Otherwise, if the two of them had just met, he wouldn't have cared about this sort of thing at all. If the Lee family wanted to seek death, that was their own business. As for how Meaty wanted to play, that was her own choice. It was fine to just watch from the sidelines, but now it was hard to maintain this sort of detached state of mind. If his mind wasn't at peace, his cultivation would only yield half the results. Chinyu stood up and pushed open the door, sitting beneath the old locust tree in the courtyard. To call it an old locust tree was an exaggeration. It was unknown how many thousands of years had passed before it had reached its current boundary. Plants and life forms cultivated like this. As long as there was the slightest mishap, all their years of hard work would be wasted. Compared to other life forms in the world, they suffered a great loss in terms of cultivation. But in the cycle of samsara, the heavenly Tao paid particular attention to fairness. It wasn't easy for plants and life forms to cultivate, but once they succeeded, they would often be extremely strong. Of course, this old locust tree was still far from that level. The only thing it could do right now was to flatter Meaty. Chinyu looked up at the old locust tree. He lightly said, "There might be some disturbances tonight. If I break your branch, consider it my apology in advance." The old locust tree shivered, as if it didn't dare, but also as if it was trembling in fear. Su Xianglin was still unconscious. Every night, Su Jiruo would carefully take care of him. Only after making sure he was fine would she return to her room. Today was no exception. She saw Chinyu holding an unknown fruit beneath the locust tree and sipping on it. She coldly snorted and left. Bang! The door was slammed shut. The Su family's little girl was indeed a smart person. After establishing a deal with little Meaty and also guessing that Chinyu didn't have any thoughts toward her, she became much bolder. Of course, beneath the raging fires in his heart, he was also dissatisfied with Chinyu. This was also an important reason. Chinyu didn't turn his head, and his expression didn't change. This was because he really didn't care. His previous expressions of helplessness and bitter smiles were all because he hoped that little Meaty would have more fun and be happier. This young lady of the Su family might be beautiful, smart, and kind-hearted. But so what? In the end, she was just a passerby in his life journey. It was fine as long as he could have a clear conscience when interacting with her. As for taking care of her feelings, he had to explain his original intentions to her. Sorry, there's really no need for that. He drank another mouthful of wine fruit and crushed the shell, letting it fall to the ground. He muttered, I really can't forget that look in your eyes. That's why I can only kill you, otherwise my heart will be filled with injustice. Pieces of wine fruit fell to the ground at his feet. Chinyu looked up at the night sky and muttered, What is little meaty looking at? How come I can't see anything? Beneath the old locust tree, there was a stone table. It had been there for countless years and had been worn down by the wind and rain. There should have been 4 round stone stools, but now there were only 2 left. Chinyu sat on one of them, leaning back against the stone table. At this moment, he narrowed his eyes and looked at the darkness that was gradually descending and growing thicker. He placed a finger on his leg and tapped it several times. A piece of wine fruit shot up from the ground and fell in front of Chinyu. He flicked his finger, and with a whoosh sound, the fragment of the wine fruit instantly disappeared into the darkness. Several thousand feet away from the Sioux family, under the shadow of a large tree, a figure's complexion changed. A certain figure's complexion suddenly changed. He took a step forward, but before he could move, his head was pierced through. Red and white blood splattered everywhere, and he fell to the ground dead. The complexions of several people changed. As they looked towards the Sioux family's courtyard, their eyes became increasingly cold. We've been discovered. It looks like the last one won't be easy to deal with. It doesn't matter if his bones are hard or not. As long as we kill him, we'll have glory and wealth in the future. Attack. Since they had been discovered, there was no meaning in continuing to hide. With loud roars, several figures broke through the air and hurtled towards the Sioux family's courtyard. Chinyu reached out a hand and slapped his knee. Large pieces of wine fruit flew into the air. With a flick of his sleeves, they all flew away. Puff, puff, puff. Every dull thud represented a body being instantly pierced through in the darkness. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere as all life was lost. Beneath the old locust tree, Chinyu had a helpless expression. He muttered, to send such characters to kill people. Just who do they look down on? He stood up and looked toward the skies. His eyes pierced through the branches of the old locust tree and looked at the thick darkness above. Tonight, there were no stars in the sky, not even a single one. This clearly wasn't normal at all. After hiding for so long, it's about time to make my move. Do you want to wait until dawn? As Chinyu spoke, he punched out his fist. Bang! A large number of old locust tree branches instantly shattered. His fist was like a dragon soaring into the heavens as it smashed into the darkness above. Shwa! Stars suddenly appeared, shining with a dazzling light. Endless starlight sprinkled down, covering Chinyu and the old locust tree. A faint, illusory figure appeared in the starlight. Its body was curled up, trembling in pain. It hadn't fully taken human form. There was a locust tree behind it. This was the old locust tree's spirit body. Now, it was bathed in starlight, as if it were in a pot of boiling oil. It twitched as it fell to the ground, screaming out in pain. Immortals save me! Immortals save me! Chinyu shook his head. Although I said I would break some of its branches and apologized ahead of time, I never said I wanted it to die. After all, it isn't easy for plants to become spirits. It would be too wasteful to burn it. He stepped forwards, causing the ground to shake. Great waves seemed to sweep out in all directions. With a loud bang, it was like the world had changed. The rules of the space around him were stripped away. Chinyu sensed what it felt like to attack. He couldn't help but sigh. No wonder people said that the higher one's cultivation was, the more they understood the immensity of the heavens and earth. Today he was still in the early stage sovereign realm. However, the situation in the 9 heavenly melodies realm was very different. For example, the way he interacted with heaven and earth. It seemed to be harmonious, but in reality, he had opened up a small world within the world itself. He was the god of that small world. Facing someone with a high cultivation, Qin Yu's method was still superficial. However, in tonight's battle, it was like bullying. He raised his hand and pointed. With a light paw sound, one of the dazzling stars that appeared shattered and extinguished. A muffled groan sounded. The perfectly hidden cultivator revealed a trace of his silhouette. One could vaguely see the shock in his widened eyes. Although his technique of restraining the stars and taking them for his own use was an incomplete technique, its might was profound and marvelous, and it could be considered to be profound and unfathomable. For many years, once a sovereign realm expert fell into it, they couldn't escape easily. But tonight, someone casually pointed and directly destroyed one of the nodes of Starfall, forcing him to reveal himself. This was the first time this had happened. In particular, the other party's finger was relaxed, and there wasn't the slightest bit of difficulty. It made him feel a chill in his heart. Do it! According to the Central Desolate, this cultivator was called an array master. He was probably the key character in this assassination. With a shout, a sword light suddenly appeared. It drew a straight line and stabbed towards Qin Yu's eyebrows. It was as fast as lightning and arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye. But what made the sword cultivator's eyes widen was that his sword was caught by two fingers. It was like he had fallen into the legendary sword trapping pool. He couldn't move at all. Qin Yu glanced at him. This sword cultivator was a decisive person. With a shout, he let go and retreated. At the same time, he didn't hesitate to detonate his sword. For him, this was a fundamental injury. But if he didn't do this, he would probably die. But the fact was that even if he did this, he would still die. The sword instantly broke apart, turning into countless tiny fragments that released a terrifying strength. It seemed as if it were about to tear apart everything. But before it could really explode, 5 fingers gently grasped it and locked it in place, turning it into an ugly iron ball. I'll return it to you. 5 fingers casually tossed it out. The iron ball howled out and sank into the sword cultivator's chest. His eyes widened and blood flowed out from every orifice of his head. In the next moment, it was like he had fallen into a sea of swords and sabers. He was instantly cut to pieces. The air was thick with the scent of blood. The sword cultivator had died. The array master revealed a look of fear. Today's plan had failed. The strength of this man that was left behind had far surpassed his expectations. How was this some early sovereign realm cultivator? Even peak sovereigns wouldn't be so strong. His thoughts of killing were extinguished. Now, all he could think of was how to escape this place. Master has ordered that if we cannot kill this person, we will both die. Bang, the ground shattered. At some unknown time, an assassin that had quietly snuck underground suddenly attacked. But at almost the same time, a giant net appeared out of thin air. It was a ghostly green color, and just looking at it made one's chest churn and nauseous. But the true killing move wasn't this ghostly green net. Although it gave off a terrifying feeling, it was more like a smokescreen. What attracted everyone's attention was a nearly transparent light silver gauze net. It looked like a woman's seductive clothing as it gently fell onto Qin Yu's body. Then, the figure of a woman really did appear. She stuck close to Qin Yu's back, completely naked. Don't move, you'll die if you move. This was the pink-dressed female cultivator that followed Li Yuantai. Tonight, she had also appeared in this assassination attempt. Qin Yu was wrapped up in the gauze net. As he heard the whispers and smelled a faint fragrance, he subconsciously furrowed his eyebrows. After ordering everyone to attack, the array master that wanted to take this chance to escape paused. He wondered if he had made a mistake in his judgment. Did this person only know the 3 mountain-splitting axes? As a rare array master, he had a high status and wasn't someone these people could compare to. Even if he fled, he would at most be punished by his master. It wouldn't be fatal, so he naturally didn't want to die with them. The assassin's body suddenly shone brightly as a suit of armor appeared and covered his entire body like flowing water. He punched Qin Yu's chest, his fist tearing through the air with an ear-piercing sound. It seemed that he didn't care about the woman lying on Qin Yu's back at all. He wanted to kill her on the spot. Qin Yu sighed softly. The fist in front of him seemed to have sunk into a swamp and couldn't move an inch. The naked and charming female cultivator behind him was sent flying. The light silver gauze net wrapped around Sheen, you shattered into countless pieces. It looks like you're the only ones who will be taking action tonight. But that's normal. We can't have an Emperor Realm cultivator interfering in such a trivial matter. The armored assassin didn't hesitate to cut off his arm to survive. However, he had only taken half a step back when he collapsed to the ground with a thump. He was no longer breathing. The armor that covered his entire body shrunk into a shiny, silver armor pellet, revealing the assassin's true appearance. It was the Leaf family steward who had come with Little Meat and Baiji. I said I wanted you dead. How could I not keep my word? Chinyu flicked his finger again. A see-through hole instantly appeared between the beautiful and pleading female cultivator's eyebrows. The one who died the worst was the Array Master. He had used some unknown method to break through space and escape. He had almost succeeded, but since he had almost succeeded, it meant that Chinyu had used his full strength. Space distorted, and the Array Master was instantly pulverized. He had advised Little Meat not to kill too many people to avoid causing too much of commotion. But in the blink of an eye, a large group of people had died. Chinyu shook his head inwardly and turned around with a smile. Why haven't you done anything yet? Chapter 1652. The ancient scholar tree shivered. There was a deathly silence in the courtyard. Chinyu calmly looked at it, his eyes gradually deepening. After several breaths of time, the ancient scholar tree's true form that appeared suddenly solidified. It was a handsome blue-robed man with a scholar tree staff on his back. At this time, his eyebrows were furrowed together, a puzzled look on his face. How did you discover me? Chinyu smiled. From the first moment I entered. Otherwise, why do you think that person that you were so afraid of was always watching the heavens from beneath a tree? At the start, I couldn't figure it out either. I only thought that a scholar tree that had cultivated to a high level might be hiding itself to protect itself. But just now, although you didn't do anything, you still revealed a trace of your aura, and it was caught by me. The ancient scholar tree man bitterly smiled. When you stepped into the Su family, I already guessed that there would be a change in my plans. Time and fate are truly unfathomable. This is likely the evolution of the heavenly Tao, the endless multiplication of veins. Chinyu said, I don't understand what you're saying, but you still haven't answered my question. The ancient scholar tree man fell silent for a moment. Because I don't dare. He raised his hand and pointed at the space in front of him. An early-stage sovereign realm expert is actually able to divide a small world. That's fine. After all, there are always outstanding people in the world. But how did you become the god of this small world? I can't figure this out. Chin-Yu's eyes were calm. You know many things, and your vision is not something that a scholar tree spirit in the East Pole County City should have. Are you using this to remind me that your background is extraordinary and that you have a powerful backer behind you? Do you want me to carefully consider how to deal with you? The scholar tree spirit smiled and cupped his hands together. Your wisdom is superb. I am indeed not a native of the East Pole County City, and this ancient scholar tree is not my main body. It is only a body that I have borrowed to live in. Chinyu thought for a moment. Then he turned and sat down. If you have anything else to say, say it all at once. Remember to think it over carefully and don't hide anything. Otherwise, if you lose your life, don't blame me for not warning you ahead of time. The scholar tree spirit's smile paused, and he furrowed his eyebrows. A solemn look appeared on his face. He glanced at Chin-Yu sitting on the stone bench and hesitated for several breaths of time before slowly saying, My master is a great person of the central desolate divine continent. 1,000 years ago, he was able to find some clues. Thus, he sent a divine avatar to the Sioux family of the East Pole County City to reside in this ancient scholar tree and secretly look after the Sioux family while waiting for the right time to arrive. This opportunity is related to my master's cultivation of the great Tao, and it is something that he must obtain. If you are willing to take a step back, you will definitely receive my master's gratitude. In the future, when you enter the central Wasteland Divine Prefecture, You can pay a visit to the drifting cloud peak and form a good relationship. It will naturally be of great benefit to you when you travel the central wasteland in the future. Qin Yu fell silent. He tapped his fingers on the table, as if he hadn't imagined that the other party would be a great person of the central wasteland. Thus, he fell into a dilemma. A smile appeared on the scholar tree spirit's face, and his tone became even more relaxed. I will let you know that my true body is a 10,000-year-old black scholar tree. Now that my divine avatar has descended, its strength is less than a tenth of my true body's. As for my realm and strength, when compared to my master's, I am extremely weak. With a flick of my sleeve, I will be reduced to powder. Qin Yu looked up. Emperor Realm? The scholar tree spirit smiled but didn't speak. Qin Yu nodded. Thank you. The scholar tree spirit was a bit stunned. He didn't know where this thank you was coming from. What he didn't know was that in order to help Qin Yu quickly accumulate his cultivation, Ruru had prepared more than one heretical method. According to Ruru, these were all compensations given by those who had made deals with her before in order to repay a debt. For her to see them and be willing to accept them to repay a debt was certainly not ordinary. For example, one of them was called Tao Tai. The advantage was that it only needed to open its mouth and swallow to convert 30% of its prey's cultivation into its own. The disadvantage was that it could only be used once in 1,000 years, otherwise it would explode and die. The reason he was thanking this locust spirit was because it had provided him with an extremely suitable candidate. Of course, this was all in the future. Even though Emperor Realm experts gave Qin Yu the feeling that they were unreasonably strong, he couldn't do anything about them. But with little Meaty here, Qin Yu felt that he could still give a try, of course. The most important reason was that in Su Zhiruo's eyes, there was a sun and moon. Little Meaty had clearly said that not only could it speed up Qin Yu's cultivation, but it could also become the key to eliminating the hidden dangers of an unstable foundation in the future. He absolutely could not miss out on this opportunity. Since that was the case, the reputation of a Taoist expert from the Central Wasteland would not be of any use. Well, with Little Meaty's help to conceal his aura, it should not be easy to find him. The locust spirit could not understand the thoughts of the person in front of him. He instinctively felt uneasy. He took a deep breath and gritted his teeth. Sir, before he could speak, he was interrupted. Qin Yu smiled and cupped his hands together. Goodbye. A great fear instantly rose up in his heart. The locust spirit roared out, I am Sweeping Cloud Peak's Black Locust Protector. He was interrupted again, but this time it was much more bloodthirsty and cruel than before. An even larger tree had quietly appeared at some unknown time. Countless branches shot out, wrapping around the ancient locust tree in the courtyard. It was like a great maw had suddenly opened and swallowed it whole. The locust spirit man bled out from his head. With a pitiful scream, he vanished into thin air. The entire process was silent. If it weren't for the deep pit in the ground, one would have suspected that everything that happened was an illusion. The chewing wine tree bowed to Qin Yu and then vanished from sight. Within her room, Su Zhiruo covered her mouth with all her might so that she wouldn't scream out in fear. Her face was pale. When she was very young, she had discovered that her eyes were different. She could see many things that she didn't want to see. For instance, that maid that constantly killed people, or for instance, the slaughter that occurred in the courtyard tonight. She never imagined that this seemingly henpecked man would actually be such a terrifyingly strong powerhouse. And she never imagined that the ancient locust tree in her family had been hidden so deeply. For 1,000 years, it had taken root in the Su family. With Su Zhiruo's intelligence, she could easily guess what their goal was. Could it be that the reason the Su family had declined from being a prominent family in a county to the present day was all because of her eyes? Then, in the past, because of her father's promiscuity, it led to the great calamity of the family. Nearly all of her relatives had died, leaving behind only her and her big brother. Was the reason really as she thought, or was there another hidden story? Thinking of this, Su Zhiruo's complexion paled and her body shivered. Suddenly, she cried out miserably. She clutched her head with her hands and rolled around on the bed. Outside the courtyard, Qin Yu was looking at Su Zhiruo's room with a look of pity in his eyes. His complexion changed, and he immediately flew out. He shook open the door and rushed in. Then he saw light gushing out from Su Zhiruo's eyes. One was dazzling, with the phantom of a great sun appearing within. The other was cold and noble, with the faint traces of a full moon. This was the so-called born with a great lucky chance, with the sun and moon hidden within one's eyes. Although the sun and moon in Su Zhiruo's eyes weren't true suns or moons, they still contained the essence of the sun and moon. They could be regarded as the source of the sun and moon that were formed by the fates of the world. If her lucky chances were high enough, she could refine the sun and moon in her eyes and take them for herself. That would be an unimaginably great good fortune. In the future, this world was destined to give birth to a super strong powerhouse, one that might even be able to cross the threshold of the Deva realm and reach the transcendent sovereign realm. But what a pity this good fortune of the sun and moon had been discovered by someone 1,000 years ago. Afterwards, a plot was set up to sever Su Zhiruo's road of cultivation, causing her to fall into the dust. Without the guidance of a master, she stepped onto the great Tao of cultivation. For these past years, the sun and moon in her eyes had been constantly sucking away her essence, energy, and divine. Thus, when they first met, Qin Yu felt that although this beautiful female cultivator's skin was fair, she didn't give off a good feeling and her aura was a bit weak. As little Meaty had said, if a lucky chance was too great, it would be hard to hold on to it. If she continued to forcefully take it, she would die. The current Su Zhiruo could only hand over the sun and moon in her eyes to preserve her life. But tonight, with her mind shaken, she stirred up the fluctuations of the sun and moon. She saw the scene before her. Unlike before, tonight was extremely dangerous. If she didn't have any external help, it was possible that Su Zhiruo would be forcefully plundered clean and she would perish here. Of course, the sun and moon in her eyes would also vanish with her death. A massive lucky chance would return to the heavens and earth. It was unknown how many years it would take for another baby with a sun and moon in her eyes to be born and inherit this lucky chance. Qin Yu certainly wouldn't stare on helplessly as this happened. He had already offended as supreme master of the Central Desolate. If all his efforts were for naught, that would truly be a tragedy. He stepped forwards and lifted a hand to touch Su Zhiruo's forehead. The sun and moon in her eyes had been hungry for so many years, and now she could finally taste the delicious food in front of her. Bang! A terrifying swallowing strength instantly erupted from her eyes, firmly sucking in Qin Yu. Qin Yu's complexion changed. He said in a low voice, Su Zhiruo, wake up. Although the Su family's change was caused by you, it is not something you could decide. Across from him, Su Zhiruo still had her eyes closed, immersed in pain. She didn't respond at all to his words. Qin Yu frowned. He took a deep breath and said, Su Zhiruo, I don't know if your mind has really fallen or if you're faking it. I will count to 3. If you don't wake up by then, I will stop. At that time, not only will you die, but your big brother will also die. 1, 2. Su Zhiruo opened her eyes. Although she was still in pain, there was also a bit of tranquility. She calmly looked at Qin Yu. Within her eyes, the shadows of the sun and moon revolved, as if they were gods from the highest heavens. Qin Yu's heart sank, but he didn't reveal any fear and his eyes didn't shrink back in the least. His fingers continued to touch her forehead, allowing the terrifying swallowing strength to wildly plunder away his strength. Su Zhiruo, if you want to defy the heavens and change your destiny, you can try, because you do indeed have the qualifications to do so. But what I want to tell you is that it is impossible for you to succeed. Whether you continue to live or whether you bring Su Xianglin down with you, you can choose now. Su Zhiruo's eyes revealed a bit of struggle. She closed her eyes, and the sun and moon phantoms in them rapidly faded away. The swallowing strength that had bitten Qin Yu vanished with it. He drew back his hand and took several steps back, gently gasping for breath. From a moment his finger touched down to the moment he withdrew his hand, Only several breaths of time had passed. But Qingyu had lost nearly a third of his strength. This was more than the battle outside the courtyard added together. It was clear to see how terrifying the situation was. If more than half of his strength were taken away, Qingyu would truly become a fish on the chopping block. It would be difficult for him to struggle free again. Su Zhiruo opened her eyes. She said in a soft voice, "You deliberately mentioned my big brother just now. Is it because you are afraid in your heart?" Qingyu took several deep breaths. He looked at her and nodded with some hesitation. "That's right. I'm a bit nervous. You will take a risk." After listening to this, Su Zhiruo fell onto her bed and fell unconscious. Qingyu took a deep breath. He turned and walked out of the courtyard. His face was pale, but his expression was calm. He really did have a way to forcefully sever the swallowing power of the sun and moon in his eyes. But if he did so, Su Zhiruo would definitely die. And the reason Su Zhiruo gave up in the end wasn't because she didn't dare to give it her all. Rather, she was well aware that even if she succeeded by a fluke and borrowed Qinyu's strength to refine the sun and moon in her eyes, she would still die. This was because little Meaty would never allow her to continue living. Su Zhiruo, who had the sun and moon hidden in her eyes, had already seen how terrifying this person was. This was an existence that truly left her in despair. So, when little Meaty first proposed a deal with her, Su Zhiruo had nodded without hesitation. If she didn't agree, she would die. Su Zhiruo didn't doubt that even if she really died, that Madame would surely have a way to obtain what she wanted. At most, she would have to spend a bit more effort. Chapter 1653. The assassination attempt against the Su family had come to an end, but the people who had been watching from afar no longer had the mind to pay attention to this matter. The Li family was even more lively. Tonight, no one knew exactly how many trump cards the Li family had prepared to keep someone alive. But the outcome was clear. All these trump cards had become a joke. The entire Li clan's residence was as quiet as a ghost's. It wasn't that the two women had killed everyone in the residence, but it was because the two women had killed everyone. But the strange thing was that everyone in the Li family mansion believed without hesitation that they could do this, and that there was a reason for them to do so. It was only because of a certain reason that they were still alive. So all of them kept quiet and obediently knelt on the ground. Even if their hands and feet trembled, they endured it. They were afraid that if they made the slightest movement, they would end up with their heads separated from their bodies. Of course, there was only one reason why everyone in the Li clan was so respectful and submissive without starting a massacre. The faster one jumped, the faster one died. And the one who was directly and cleanly killed was the Li family's greatest source of confidence tonight. Even now, everyone in the Li family still found it hard to believe. How powerful was that person? Even the county governor had to be respectful in front of her. However, after being glanced at by that madam, he could no longer move, and his head was chopped off by that maidservant. Li Yuantai knelt on the ground, his face pale and body trembling. He still hadn't recovered from his shock. How did things end up like this? As a smart person, he was willing to be a marionette, but who would have thought that being a marionette and listening to others would end up like this? He complained in his heart. He knew that if he had to blame someone, he could only blame the person behind him. That person's skill level was very average. Or could he blame the two women in front of him for hiding too deeply? He was clearly a true dragon that could shake the earth and mountains with just a flip of his body. Why did he pretend to be a harmless reptile? Otherwise, things wouldn't have turned out this way. Suddenly, Li Yuantai's body stiffened. His face paled and sweat dripped down his forehead. Now, the gaze that fell on him felt as if it weighed 10,000 kilograms, wanting to crush his spine and bones. "Hand over the clearance token." Baiji said the madam's words. As for these people, they weren't qualified to listen to her. They weren't worthy. Li Yuantai hurriedly took out 2 clearance tokens, knelt on the ground, and respectfully raised his hands above his head. Baiji flicked her sleeve and took it. Little Meaty raised her hand and pointed a finger at it. Puff! With a muffled sound, Li Yuantai's body exploded, and his soul was instantly captured, falling into Meaty's hand. His eyes were wide open, and his face was filled with terror and despair. However, he was unable to struggle in the slightest, as he was completely suppressed. The corners of Ro's lips curled up, revealing a cold smile. She lifted her hand and pointed forward, her fingertip landing between his eyebrows. "Ah!" Li Yuantai cried out in anguish. As if he had fallen into a pot of boiling oil, his entire soul emitted thick smoke. The surface of his soul began to rapidly fester and melt. A soul fragment that looked like black jade, shrouded in black energy, flew out from between his eyebrows and fell into the meaty hand. In the next moment, Li Yuantai's soul vanished into thin air. The so-called second young master of the Li clan was a smart person who pretended to be stupid, but he didn't know that from the beginning he was not a real living person. Even if he was willing to be a marionette, disregarding everything else and only enjoying the glory and splendor in front of him, his fate was still doomed to be miserable. If he wasn't miserable today, he would be miserable tomorrow. This was an unchanging fact. She brought the black, jade-like soul fragment closer to her eyes and carefully examined it. Suddenly, a handsome face appeared, but right now it was twisted and fierce. It glared at little Meaty. "You destroyed my soul fragment and ruined my great Tao. This enmity is absolutely irreconcilable." Little Meaty smiled. "Then don't. What can you do?" With a flick of her finger, the soul fragment emitted a light cracking sound. The divine sense and will contained within was directly shattered and erased. This was the key reason why she was willing to personally make a trip to the Li clan tonight. If she wanted to steal someone's lucky chance and good fortune, she naturally had to go all out. She had to obtain all of the karma between them. Only then would she be able to accomplish this. The result wasn't too bad. As for the consequences of this, in this world, there was nothing that didn't involve karma. If she stole someone's lucky chance and good fortune, wouldn't that person bear a grudge? Little Meaty didn't think that she was such a domineering and overbearing person. If worst came to worst, she could just kill him later and use him as a cultivation material for Chinyu. Then, she could thoroughly resolve this karma. "I'm leaving." Little Meaty stood up and walked out. Baiji respectfully followed behind. If this were before, her eyes might be icy cold as she secretly swept over the Li family members present, killing intent boiling in her heart. But now, she clearly wouldn't do such a thing. The madam naturally had her reasons for her decision. There was no need for her to look for any loopholes. Since the madam wasn't willing to kill them, then she would let them continue living. In any case, they were nothing more than trash from the gutters. So what if they lived on? What could they do to overturn the heavens? As they left the Li family and stepped through the main doors, countless eyes fell on the master and servant pair. But that was all. They only dared to watch from afar. No one dared to approach, and no one was stupid enough to do anything. Within the East Pole County city, the Li family wasn't the strongest. But besides the Yang family, who dared to say that they could truly suppress the Li family? If this master and servant duo could suppress the Li family tonight, then they could easily consign them to eternal damnation. As for the Yang family, there was no enmity between them. Was it really worth it just to be curious? Or was it because they had a good relationship with the Li family? Forget it. Stop joking around, okay? Everyone here was an adult. They smoothly returned to the Su family's courtyard. Baiji pushed open the door and respectfully drew back. Meaty stepped in. Her eyes swept around and fell on Chinyu, who was silently standing beside the pit in the ground. Looking at him, her face paled. Meaty's lips curved up in a mocking smile. "Sir Chin, you almost failed miserably. How did it feel?" Chinyu opened his eyes, his expression calm. "Very good." After a moment of hesitation, he continued to say, "Although some of my strength was taken away, that sun and moon can still be considered to have left behind my mark." Meaty coldly sneered. "Stubborn. This time, you owe me half your life. Don't deny it. Otherwise, I will settle this debt with you." Chinyu hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Although Meaty's words were a bit far-fetched, they weren't without reason. Before this, if Su Ji had really risked her life, she would have died. But Qin Yu wouldn't have been able to stay out of the commotion caused by the collapse of the sun and moon. At that time, perhaps a small half of the East Pole County city would have been swept clean. Just thinking about the commotion left one feeling sour and refreshed. Meaty turned and glanced at Qin Yu. Baiji respectfully stepped forward and took out 2 pass tokens. Qin Yu put them away, a bit of helplessness on his face. He originally wanted to quietly enter the Central Desolate without drawing any attention. But things didn't go as he wished. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have gone through so much trouble. He could have directly sought out the various great families in the county city and threatened them. He would have obtained the pass tokens long ago and wouldn't have suffered so many twists and turns. But thinking about it, if it weren't for the previous twists and turns, they wouldn't have entered Shiyu's shop, and they wouldn't have met this Su family girl who had been born with a lucky chance, but had fallen into a trap. This was probably what it meant by everything is destined by the heavens. Meaty curled her lips. She turned and walked back to her room, thinking what bullshit heavens meant. On the night of the Lantern Festival, there were countless businesses in the county city. There weren't many that hung red lanterns at their doors, but there were dozens of them. In the end, he had chosen Shiyu's shop. Was it really because the red lantern in front of his door was the largest? Meaty had to admit that this was the reason. But Qin Yu still hadn't seen the deeper meaning behind it. Su Zhuo was of course the key. She was a lucky chance that no one dared to underestimate. But besides that, there was a deeper meaning, and it all depended on whether or not Qin Yu could discover it before he left the East Pole County City. If she tried, the result would be the same. But if she did that, it would be a bit less meaningful. Beside the old locust tree pit, Qin Yu looked down at the 2 pass tokens in his hands, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Tonight, Meaty had personally made a trip to the Leaf family. Since she had said that it would be difficult to obtain several pass tokens, it wouldn't be difficult at all, let alone 2, even if it was double or triple. The Leaf family, who had been scared witless and would rather be investigated in the future, wouldn't be able to take them out? Clearly not. The reason Meaty had only brought out 2 was to tell Qin Yu that Shiyu's shop still owed them a pass token. As for whether or not they owed him a pass token, that would depend on what Qin Yu did. She wouldn't interfere. The night passed. Su Xianglin and Su Zhuo were both fast asleep. There was a knock on the door. Qin Yu moved to open it and looked at Zhou Yunshan, his expression calm. Outside, the pale-faced shopkeeper, Zhou, took a deep breath. He bitterly smiled and bowed. "Guest, I have come here today to apologize for my crimes. Please give me a chance." As he spoke, a pass token appeared in his hand, and he offered it with both hands. Qin Yu received it and put it away. "Come in and speak." Zhou Yunshan respectfully thanked him. The deep pit in the courtyard had been flattened. Without the old locust tree, the 9 suns sprinkled down above, making the place even brighter. But now, it gave off a somewhat empty feeling. There were only 2 round stools on either side of the stone table. Qin Yu sat down first. He gestured with his hand. "Shopkeeper Zhou, please sit." Zhou Yunshan sighed inwardly. Today's politeness represented alienation. He really needed to figure things out. Erasing the last bit of hope in his heart, he sat down and said, "Concerning the matter of the 3 guests, it was indeed Shiyu's shop who deliberately leaked it. They borrowed the Yang and Li families of the county city to add a bit more trouble to the guests." Qin Yu glanced at him. "Shopkeeper Zhou, can you explain why you did this?" Zhou Yunshan had a calm expression and a firm light in his eyes. "I apologize." Qin Yu lightly said, "Since that's the case, does shopkeeper Zhou believe that by apologizing and handing over this pass token, this matter could be considered settled?" Zhou Yunshan shook his head. "I wouldn't dare to have such extravagant hopes." His complexion paled even further. He stood up and respectfully bowed. "I am willing to use my head to exchange for guest forgiveness and to not pursue this matter any further." Qin Yu had a faint expression, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Before this, he indeed hadn't thought too much about it. But after Meaty's reminder, he looked at shopkeeper Zhou with a different aura. Chi's shop had been operating in the East Pole County city for hundreds of years. Who would have thought that this was the plan of some clan? Many years ago, there was once a year hall that specialized in all sorts of pastries in the Middle Desolate. They had opened in countless cities, large and small, and could be called an outstanding shop. Then, one day, the winds and clouds suddenly rose and the sun and moon suddenly changed. Countless people widened their eyes in astonishment. It was only then that they discovered that this year hall, which sold pastries, had hidden themselves so deeply. Chi didn't have much evidence, but since both parties had the word "you" in their names, there should be some degree of connection between them. Was it that clan that had discovered their own roots? Chi didn't think so. Otherwise, this shopkeeper Zhou in front of him wouldn't have acted on his own initiative. The entire clan had already come out in full force. They didn't hesitate to pay any price to destroy the entire East Pole County city so that Chi would die without a grave. After spending a great deal of money to barely avert this disaster and preserve his life, shopkeeper Zhou bid his farewells and left with a pale face. Looking at shopkeeper Zhou, who was sweating profusely and on the verge of collapse, one could tell that in that moment, other than using a large sum of money to buy his life, shopkeeper Zhou should have said something else. For example, pointing out his background so that shopkeeper Zhou, who was lucky enough to survive, would never dare to mention this matter again in the future. Misty appeared behind Chinyu. She sat down on his seat and frowned. "You let him go like this?" Chinyu lightly said. "So what if I killed him? In the end, I won this round." He paused for a moment and then revealed a smile. "This is a good start. I'll consider it a good omen and avoid the sin of killing." Misty coldly sneered, "Hypocrite." Chinyu thought about what he had to do and then thought about what he had just said. It was indeed hypocritical to the extreme. He rubbed his nose and didn't speak. Chapter 1654. After the Leaf family's incident, the entire East Pole County city was quiet. Besides the Leaf family members who had disappeared, it was like nothing had happened. The Su family residents welcomed true peace. No one rose up to die again. This left Baiji a little disappointed. After Su Zhuo woke up, she spoke with little Misty once more. Chinyu still didn't participate, but looking at her expression afterwards, it seemed she had accepted her fate. 4 days later, the 3 past tokens in Chinyu's hands began to shine with a faint halo of light, reminding the holder that tonight was the day the pass would open. He was secretly relieved that the sweeping cloud peak master of the central wasteland divine continent hadn't arrived at the East Pole County city. It was unknown if he was busy healing himself or if he had been delayed by other matters. But there was something else that left Chinyu puzzled. Little Misty hadn't taken away. Su Jiruo's eyes shined with the sun and moon. He was a little puzzled, but he didn't say anything. If even he couldn't renege on little Misty's debt, then there was no need to mention others. In this aspect, Chinyu believed in little Misty's professional integrity. Perhaps it wasn't time yet, or perhaps there was some other agreement. As for whether or not Su Zhuo would be controlled after they left, she must have made arrangements ahead of time. Otherwise, if they worked so hard only to end up helping someone else, little Misty definitely wouldn't accept such a sullen result. As night fell, Chinyu stood up and left. He didn't think Su Zhuo would be in the courtyard, as if she knew they were leaving tonight. After the sun and moon trembled that night, the two hadn't spoken in private again. Now that their eyes met, Su Zhuo let out a deep breath and bowed. "My eyes have been clear since I was a child, and I can see many things. The Jade Gate Pass opens every month on this day. This is the usual rule." She hesitated for a moment and continued to say, "On that day, you helped me, and I repaid kindness with enmity. I hope you won't hold a grudge against me." Chinyu said, "Don't worry. Since you made a deal with her, everything that happened before will be written off. I won't look into it afterwards." Chinyu looked at her and smiled. "In terms of credibility, you could trust me." Su Jiruo's eyes shined with the sun and moon. Not only could she see many things, but there were also many mysteries. For instance, when she was serious, she could peek into a person's heart. So, she let out a sigh of relief and bowed even more respectfully. "Guest, I wish you a smooth journey." Qin Yu cupped his hands together. Thank you for your auspicious words. Baiji pushed the door and respectfully stepped aside. Meaty stepped out. Are you done whispering? Miss Su seems to be very reluctant to part with him. Why don't we wait a little longer? Su Zhuo blushed, but she did not say anything. She bowed and returned to her room. Qin Yu said, Let's go. It's not good to have someone wait for us. Meaty sneered. I'm worried that someone will fall for the honey trap and change their mind at the last minute, ruining the previous plan. Qin Yu pretended as if he didn't hear anything. He turned and walked out. As he pushed open the door, he thought about how he hadn't offended her these past few days. As they left the courtyard, Baiji walked behind Qin Yu. She coughed and said, Immortals seeking tower. Qin Yu faintly frowned. Then, a look of understanding crossed his face. He turned to look at little Meaty, who had a grim expression on her face. He helplessly said, Since I have agreed to something, I will naturally keep my word. But we have to wait until we smoothly enter the Jade Gate Pass before we talk about the God's Nectar, right? Little Meat looked at Baiji and said, Your tongue is so long. Why don't I help you pull it out? Baiji's face turned pale, and she hurriedly lowered her head. Humph! Little Meat stepped forwards. Qin Yu helplessly shook his head. He was well aware that the God's Nectar was only an excuse. The crux of the problem was that he had been cultivating in seclusion these past few days and hadn't shown himself outside. This was a difficult problem. Scratching his head, Qin Yu followed after her. He didn't think that Little Meat was being unreasonable. Rather, he thought that perhaps it was because she had lived alone in that pitch-black world in the past and had been far too lonely. Even after nightfall, the East Pole County City was still incomparably lively. Although tonight wasn't the Lantern Festival, there were still some flickering lanterns. This caused Qin Yu, who had been in a tense state, to inexplicably relax a little. As he looked at the back of a certain lantern girl, he inexplicably recalled the lantern girl from the Lantern Festival that day. She was certainly extremely beautiful, and with such a beautiful girl staring at him, how could Qin Yu not have a reaction? This was probably a man's instinct. No matter how calm he appeared on the surface, there was still a trace of delight in his heart. Of course, that was all there was to it. There was nothing else. There were so many beautiful things in this world. You couldn't fall in love with someone as soon as you saw them and hold them in your arms. That was far too tiring and disrespectful to the beautiful things in this world. Little Meat glanced at Qin Yu. This time she was a bit angry, but her tone was actually very calm. Who are you thinking of that you are smiling so happily? Qin Yu coughed. Without realizing it, he put away the light smile that had unconsciously appeared on his lips. I was thinking about whether or not I should buy some lanterns from the East Pole County City so that when I have nothing better to do in the future, I can take them out for Miss Little Meat to pass the time. Little Meat humphed. I'm not that bored. But when Qin Yu really went to a roadside stall to haggle with the stall owner and choose a lantern to buy, she dawdled over and impatiently said, Hurry up and buy them. You're a big man, so why are you dawdling around? I don't want to wait any longer. The stall owner beamed with joy. This miss is right. A man should be generous, otherwise he will be laughed at. Qin Yu revealed a helpless expression. He could only buy them at a high price. He picked up over a dozen lanterns and lifted them into a large mass. Do they look good? Little Meat curled her lips. They're just SOSO. Then, she discovered that Qin Yu's eyes had paused for a moment. Looking over, Little Meat's eyebrows rose up. She looked at Qin Yu and then at the lanterns in his hands. She didn't find any of them pleasing to the eye. Across from them was a group of women who seemed to be strolling through the night market. There was a girl with long eyebrows. Like Qin Yu, she carried many lanterns in her hands. Now, she was looking at Qin Yu and gently biting her lips. Although the two of them hadn't spoken a single word, the bitterness in her eyes seemed as if it would flow out at any moment. They were about to leave the East Pole County City, and yet they actually met here. There are definitely some surprises, especially when Qin Yu secretly thought about this girl's long eyebrows just now. As he looked at the girl carrying lanterns across from him, he couldn't help but feel a bit guilty. He hesitated for a moment before smiling and nodding to her. Humph. Little Meat turned and walked away. Baiji glanced at Chinyu. Her eyes were as calm as possible, not revealing the least bit of emotion. If this were before, she would have been seething with killing intent. Chinyu bitterly smiled. He picked up the lanterns and chased after her. What are you looking at? You look so entranced. A woman beside her said in a soft voice. Between her eyebrows, there was an imperceptible frown. Jiang Jiua watched as that person turned around without hesitation. She felt a sense of loss in her heart. She paused for a moment and then shook her head. Ani, I'm fine. I'm just a bit tired. Ani Jiang nodded. She smiled and said, You probably came out early today and haven't eaten anything yet, so it's normal to be tired. She swept her eyes over everyone. How about we find a private restaurant first and eat some dishes? It won't be too late to rush to the summit afterwards. Some people agreed, but there were also some who hesitated. Auntie Jiang, the county city's gates will close at night. If we delay too long, I fear we won't be able to make it in time. Auntie Jiang smiled and took out a token. Although it was only the size of a child's palm and looked unremarkable, the women present tonight were all upper-class people of the county city. They naturally recognized its origin. Auntie Jiang has the token of the county governor. There will be no problem for us to enter and exit the city. Auntie Jiang is so thoughtful. Then we can rest for a while and then rush to the summit. Among the group of women, someone secretly frowned, but her face was full of smiles. I heard that there is a whistling pine pavilion at the summit. It's a place where the army is stationed. If we can climb it, we can see the Jade Gate Pass from afar. The view is wide and clear. It's a first-class scenic spot. If Sister Jiang has the token and can take us to the Whistling Pine Pavilion, that would be great. Auntie Jiang glanced at the woman who was of the same generation as her. The two had grown up together and were close friends to the outside world. But in secret, they had never stopped competing. The Whistling Pine Pavilion was an important military place. How could it be easily climbed? But luckily, she had anticipated this and made preparations. Looking at Auntie Jiang's faint smile after a slight pause, the woman who spoke before felt her heart skip a beat. As expected, Auntie Jiang smiled and said, Although it's a bit difficult, since Sister Rong has spoken, I will naturally do it. Auntie Jiang turned around and glanced at the women around her. Tonight, we will climb the Whistling Pine Pavilion and watch the carp leap over the Dragon Gate. Cheers rang out. Apart from a woman with the word Rong in her name, who had a forced expression, the eyes of the other women brightened. They all looked at Auntie Jiang with admiration and admiration. As expected of the most famous woman in our county city, Annie Jiang. Even in the Great Pine Pavilion, she was able to bring people to ascend at night. This matter seemed unremarkable, but it represented her power and status in the county city. She could not be underestimated. Sensing the women's gazes, Auntie Jiang smiled and said, It is a coincidence that I can bring you up tonight. It is said that this time, a young master of the Yang family is going to the Western Baron, so the Whistling Pine Pavilion is open for this young master to rest. After we go in, we just need to guard a table and a chair. Don't say or do anything to avoid trouble. A young master of the Yang family? The women's eyes brightened. They felt that tonight was more and more worth looking forward to. Although they were only women in the pavilion and didn't need to socialize with their fathers and brothers, they still had sharp eyes and ears. Of course, they had heard about some of the things that happened in the Yang family recently. The previous head of the Yang family actually had a son who was stranded outside. Now that he had returned to the family, he had become the uncle of a group of young masters of the Yang family. Not only that, this young master of the Yang family also had a keepsake in his hand, which was related to the succession of the Yang family head. Of course, although they knew about these things, they were warned by their fathers and brothers that they must not say a word outside, otherwise there would be trouble. The succession of the Yang family head, such a big matter. Who dared to get involved? According to common sense, it would be difficult for such a troublemaker to get the approval of the Yang family, let alone stir up people's hearts. But this young master of the Yang family had done it. It was said that he almost caused a huge uproar in the ancestral temple, and several elders of the Yang family argued fiercely about him. This also made many people in the county city think, if they could invest in this young master of the Yang family, they might have an unexpected harvest in the future. And this was also the reason why the group of unmarried women's eyes were shining. Of course, they wouldn't rush to do anything before the situation was clear. But if they could see this young master of the Yang family earlier and leave an impression, they would have an advantage in the future. Thinking of this, their hearts couldn't help but burn, and their eyes became brighter. Chapter 1655. The Yang family was unfathomably deep. They occupied the top position in the East Pole County city. This was something everyone knew and had to admit. Even the prefectural governor of the prefectural governor manor, who had always lived in seclusion and rarely revealed his emotions, did not have any objections. After all, the reason why the Lord County Governor was able to smoothly rise to the position of East Pole County City was because he had first obtained the approval of the Yang family. It seemed strange, but as long as one thought about the commander's tent 1,800 miles away from the East Pole Mountain and the commander who commanded millions of soldiers named Yang Wudi, everything made sense. Of course, no one had ever admitted the relationship between the two Yang characters, but some things were like this. It was enough to know. Otherwise, the commander of the army could not leave his tent without permission. Why did a Yang family appear in the East Pole County city? This was a matter that was difficult to explain. Moreover, Yang Wudi, the commander of the Eastern Border Army, had a legally married wife in the general's mansion in the imperial capital. Her status was extremely illustrious. If it was really put in public, wouldn't it make that wife lose face? This was a clear slap to the faces of the two mountain peaks of the military. No one had the guts to do this. So even though this was the case, no one said anything. Everyone just pretended to be ignorant. It was also because of this that when the Jade Gate Pass opened tonight, the military Songtao Pavilion made an exception and opened its doors to welcome guests. Deep in the night, the Jade Gate Pass was still as dazzling as ever. It was like a great sun, illuminating the eastern half of the mountain as if it were daytime. But these rays of light didn't cross the line in the slightest. When they were still some distance away from a mountain peak, they came to a sudden stop. It was as if there was an invisible barrier that restricted these rays of light, forcing them to remain within the territory of the central wasteland Divine Prefecture. In the Songtao Pavilion, Yang Fanshan's expression was calm. He sat by the window with the best view, quietly looking at the Jade Gate Pass in the distance. He completely ignored the gazes that were quietly sizing him up. The process of entering the Yang family had been very smooth, so smooth that none of the preparations he had made had to be used. This made Yang Fanshan's heart even colder. But on the surface, he was still the same Yang family's little uncle who barely managed to maintain his composure after being overjoyed. In terms of seniority, there was nothing he could do about it. Today, when he left the Yang family mansion, according to custom, a group of Yang family youths came to see him off. This was the first time that Yang Fanshan felt a trace of sincerity from their greetings and greetings. His heart grew colder and colder. With his current state of mind, how could he still have the thought to care about the gazes of the young ladies from the various families in the county city? Furthermore, there was already a figure in the depths of his heart. That night, with just a single glance, he had seen her in his heart. That was why he had hurriedly revealed his identity. Otherwise, his situation today would have been much better than it was now. Yang Fanshan did not regret it. Even if he had to do it all over again, he would still do it. Unfortunately, he might not have the chance to express his feelings to her. Of course, if Yang Fanshan was willing, he would definitely be able to do it. Right now, he could instruct someone to bring her here, but he would not do that. If he could really protect himself and become a wealthy direct descendant of the Yang family, then he would very much hope to see her again. But since he could not, then he might as well not see her. He drank a mouthful of tea. The fragrance of the tea filled the air, but Yang Fanshan could only taste the bitterness in his mouth. He couldn't help but frown. This scene caused several young ladies in the Great Pine Pavilion who were secretly peeking at this young master of the Yang family to feel an inexplicable pain in their hearts. They always felt that there were many, many things hidden in his heart. Jiang Jiyue was not among them. She was staring at the teacup in her hand, frowning from time to time or gently biting her lips. She had originally thought that after the night of the Lantern Festival, they would never meet again. But who would have thought that they would suddenly meet again today? The young lady did not know just what was hidden in that person that she could not get rid of after just 2 meetings. In terms of outstanding young people, she had actually seen many of them. The older brothers of the various great families in the city, the young master of the city lord's mansion, and even the direct descendants of several cultivation sections. So Jiang Jiyue could not understand why. What made the young lady's heart feel empty and sad was that up until now, she had not even said a word to that person, let alone know what his name was. More importantly, she did not know whether or not the fate between the two of them was over. If they never met again after today, thinking of this, Jiang Jiyue felt a little sour in her nose. She could not help but slightly redden her eyes. She looked down at the teacup in front of her more and more seriously, like a little ostrich burying its head in the sand. Aunt Jiang noticed that her niece was acting strangely tonight. As someone who had experienced it, she could roughly guess the young lady's thoughts with a glance. But on the surface, she did not reveal any of it, let alone take the initiative to mention it, at least not tonight. Otherwise, her younger sister Rome would probably take the opportunity to say a few words. In reality, nothing would happen, but it was inevitable that some rumors would spread in the dark. The surrounding young girls did not know how to hide their feelings at all. When they looked at the distant young Master Yang, they could not hide their emotions. To be honest, Yang Fanshan's appearance was indeed very handsome. Now that his identity had been recognized by the Yang family, it was indeed enough to move people's hearts. But tonight, Aunt Jiang's attention had not been on Yang Fanshan from beginning to end. She only glanced at him a few times. He was destined to live short life. So what if he was dazzling tonight? The daughter of the Jiang family would not marry such a person. She took the opportunity when the disciples of the Yang family came out of seclusion and the opening of Pine Tao Pavilion to ask the county governor for the token to come here. From the beginning, her target was not Yang Fanshan. Aunt Jiang did not tell anyone about this. Even her niece was kept in the dark, not to mention Sister Rome. It was just a smokescreen that Aunt Jiang had pulled over. Jiang Jiyue's seat was not very good, and she did not look at them too much. She looked a little lonely, which made her stand out among them. This was also the reason why Aunt Jiang had not said anything even though she had discovered it from the very beginning. Because what she really cared about was that young officer wearing armor and holding a spear standing by the window. He had already glanced at her twice. That was already enough. The children of the Yang family, especially those who were qualified to train with the army, were as firm as a rock. Naturally, they would remember it in their hearts. If this could be done, even with Aunt Jiang's cultivation heart, she could not help but feel excited. From this point of view, it was a good thing that Zhe met that man tonight. Aunt Jiang smiled slightly, and her posture became more and more relaxed. At this moment, the officer wearing armor and holding a spear by the window stepped toward the young master of the Yang family, who was sitting by the window. Yang Fanshan turned his head, and their eyes met. He frowned and said, "Are you the messenger tonight?" The officer nodded calmly. He took out a jade slip from his arms and put it on the table. The children of the Yang family are not afraid of hardships. Since you have this identity, you have to bear the risks. Yang Fanshan was silent for a moment and said slowly, "I only hope that the risks come from the outside world and not from someone who wants me dead." Xiao Xiao glanced at him and said, "I can guarantee you that the Yang family will not kill each other." Their voices were very low, and they deliberately covered it up. The people in the Songtao Pavilion only saw the officer walk over and say a few words to Yang Fanshan, but didn't know the content. But this was already amazing enough. Some people couldn't help but look at the officer, and the more they looked, the more frightened they became. Jiang Jiyue still didn't look up. So, the officer's eyes fell on her for the third time. Different from before, his eyes lingered for a bit. The girl with long eyebrows seemed to feel something at this moment. She looked up and met his eyes and subconsciously frowned. Aunt Jiang, who was watching from the side, saw her niece frowning at this moment, but she didn't panic. Instead, the smile on her face became wider. As the saying goes, a goddess is ruthless and the most provocative. Even if you are a proud son of heaven, as long as you fall into her eyes, your heart will be scratched. In particular, Jiang Jiyue didn't know the inside story, and her actions were out of her heart, so it was even more touching. The real child of the Yang family, who came here with a hidden identity, had a firm will, but his slightly bright eyes still revealed his true state of mind. This was a pleasant surprise. Tonight, she hadn't wasted her effort in begging the county governor to bring her niece here. The girls next to her, who had started to pay attention to the armor-clad officer, were at a complete disadvantage from start. Compared to Jiang Jiyue, they couldn't be compared at all. Humph! Jiang Jiyue frowned. She snorted and turned her head. She remembered that her aunt had told her not to cause trouble in the Songtao Pavilion. But she still didn't like the look in this person's eyes. Although there was appreciation in his eyes, there was more of a kind of naked invasion. She didn't lower her head because she didn't want the person to think that she was nervous or shy. Turning her head to look out the window was a kind of invisible neglect. "I don't like you." This was her attitude. The young man, called Yang Qianren, was one of the more outstanding ones among his father's many sons. He had always been by the side of the commander's tent and had high standards. There had indeed been discussions about marriage, but he didn't like any of those women. Tonight, he had been ordered to come to the Songtao Pavilion. He had originally wanted to see what this girl with a fire flood dragon on her chest was like and relax a little. After all, he had been by his father's side all year round. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that accompanying a father was like accompanying a tiger. Unexpectedly, there was an unexpected harvest. This woman in front of him was to his liking. In that case, the woman was his. The corners of the officer's mouth curled up. He suddenly turned his head, and his eyes fell on Aunt Jiang. When their eyes met, the latter's expression changed, and her smile became a little forced. This woman's methods might seem smooth and refined, but in the end, they couldn't be put on the table. The smile at the corner of Yang Qianren's mouth became more and more amused. He felt that this beautiful, round woman was similar to the young girl beside her in terms of facial features. But at this time, Yang Qianren frowned. He was no longer in the mood to watch. The woman in front of him revealed a trace of panic. Jiang Jiyue abruptly sat up straight, her eyes widening as she looked outside. Her taut face was full of surprise and disbelief. She looked again and couldn't help but pinch herself. It hurts. It really is him. Chapter 1656. The girl's eyes were blazing, but Qin Yu ignored them. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but that he couldn't and he didn't dare to. But little Meaty stopped. She turned to look at Songtao Pavilion, her face expressionless. "Young Master Qin, this is fate." Qin Yu coughed. "You and I, of course we are fated. There is no doubt about this." Little Meaty's lips curved up. A man's mouth is like a ghost that deceives others. It really makes sense. She pointed a finger. "Let's go. There's still time. Although you can't do anything in front of everyone's eyes, there's still time to say a few words." Qin Yu rubbed his eyebrows. "Forget it. We don't want to complicate matters." Little Meaty said, "I am taking care of business right now." Qin Yu helplessly watched as she walked forwards. He could only follow. The master and servant trio walked towards Songtao Pavilion. Everyone in the hall sensed this. Sitting by the window, Yang Fan's Han had a thoughtful look on his face. Outside Songtao Pavilion, two armored border soldiers stepped forwards, their eyes icy cold. This is a restricted area of the military. Unauthorized people are not allowed to approach. Quickly withdraw. Qin Yu glanced at the two, thinking that they were quite bold. He secretly gave him a thumbs up. "Since they won't let us in, let's go." That long-browed girl had been staring at him from just now. Her eyes were bright and bright, making him feel a bit uncomfortable. If he couldn't see her, then he would. Meaty raised her head and glanced upstairs. I feel that someone will invite us in today. Just as she finished speaking, Yang Fanzhan stood up from the window. These three are my friends. Invite them in. The two armored border soldiers at the door immediately revealed awkward expressions. Yang Qianren furrowed his eyebrows. Then he relaxed and nodded. The two border soldiers immediately relaxed. They each took a step back and gestured. You three, please. Aunt Jiang had been uncomfortable under Yang Qianren's gaze just now. She revealed a bit of worry. She wasn't surprised that today's matters had been discovered. After all, if the son of the commander of the army could be personally trained by him, he naturally wouldn't be an ordinary person. But his gaze just now had caused Aunt Jiang to miscalculate. She began to regret her plans tonight. If things had reached this point, there was still room for redemption. After all, the Jiang family was a prominent family in the county capital. With the help of the county governor, Aunt Jiang felt at ease. But at this critical moment, the man she had just seen had actually come to Great Pine Pavilion. Her niece's eyes had already revealed her intentions. Aunt Jiang secretly complained. Given Yang Qianren's status and his pride, how could he hold himself back now that he had fallen into a trap and had lusted after Jiang Zhiyue? Thinking of this, Aunt Jiang felt even more remorseful, especially when she glanced at the hidden Yang family disciple out of the corner of her eyes. After a sneer, the expression on her face became more and more forced. The master and servant trio ascended the rustling pine pavilion. Yang Fanzhan cupped his hands together with a faint smile. You three, we meet again. It really is fate that brings us together. If you don't mind, please have a seat and enjoy a pot of purple tea from the Eastern Pole Mountains with me. As the saying went, purple aura comes from the east. To the east of the East Pole Mountain was the famous Eastern Wasteland Divine Prefecture. With such a name, the value of the tea naturally skyrocketed. Moreover, purple aura tea was truly wondrous. Not only did it contain abundant spiritual strength, but after the tea leaves were brewed, faint traces of purple energy lingered around them. When a cultivator drank it, they would feel refreshed and refreshed. In a crowded situation, little Meaty basically didn't speak, so Baiji naturally wouldn't overstep her boundaries. Thus, Qinyu became the master of the house. He smiled and cupped his hands together. Then I'll have to trouble you. Although little Meaty didn't explicitly say why she came to Great Pine Pavilion, Qinyu could guess what her intentions were. If someone said that little Meaty was really here to create a chance for him and Miss Longbrowed to meet, then he couldn't believe half a word of it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have stabbed Qinyu several times outside Great Pine Pavilion just now. It was clear that she was extremely dissatisfied with this situation. Even though he was dissatisfied, he still chose to endure it. Thus, when little Meaty said that she was here to take care of official business, Qinyu believed her. And this official business should be related to the person in front of him. But as for what it was, he couldn't figure it out. That was fine. He didn't need to think too much about it, so he could concentrate on cultivating. This was probably why little Meaty had been deliberately keeping it a secret. Qinyu guessed this, so he didn't have any ill feelings in his heart. He simply threw everything to her and was happy to be free and relaxed. Yang Fanzhan smiled and gestured with his hand. Qinyu and little Meaty sat down across from him. Purple energy tea was poured into white porcelain cups. Faint traces of purple energy rippled within, seeming a bit more mystical. Thank you. Qinyu faintly smiled. He picked up the teacup and took a sip, his expression calm and relaxed. But now, except for long eyebrow besides Miss Longbrowed Lady's eyes, there was also another gaze that fell upon him. A beautiful girl looking at me is fine. Although I can't stop her, I'm actually secretly happy in my heart. But why is a rough soldier like you looking at me? What was the reason for that cold smile at the corner of his mouth? We've never met before. Jiang Zhiyue suddenly stood up. She didn't know where this girl's courage came from. Could someone have lent it to her? Many pairs of eyes instantly gathered on her face. She was a bit flustered, but she clenched her teeth and forced herself not to sit down. Otherwise, if she sat down, she wouldn't have the courage to stand up again, and it would be impossible for her to say another word to him. She took a deep breath and quickly walked to the window. Her face was bright red, and under the light of the lantern light, her beauty was indescribable. Yang Qianren suddenly felt that this girl in front of him was far more beautiful than the one he had seen before. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes, the corners of his lips curving up even more. My name is Jiang Jue, the Jiang Jue of the moonlit night flowing like flowers. What is your name? Perhaps because she was too nervous, the girl's voice was a bit loud. Moreover, her first words had clearly stated the meaning of her father's name in the past. She was embarrassed beyond belief. Her face flushed even redder, but she continued to bravely stare at the person in front of her. Yang Fanzhan was slightly startled. He silently watched from the side. He had only invited the three of them to Great Pine Pavilion because his thoughts had stirred. If the heavens didn't kill him, there would naturally be a chance. Otherwise, to be able to see such a brave and truthful girl before he left could be considered a fortunate matter. Little Meat held a cup of tea, her face expressionless as she looked straight ahead. Behind her, Baiji had her head lowered. She resisted the urge to look up, but right now, in her heart, she felt great admiration towards this Miss Jiang Jue. To dare compete with her madam, she was truly bold. And in truth, Baiji also hoped that she would succeed. Of course, she could only hide all of this in her heart, not daring to reveal it. Otherwise, Baiji worried that her madam would really slap her to death. Qinyu put down his teacup. He stood up and cupped his hands together. Miss Jiang, I am Qinyu. Although he felt a deep headache, this girl had personally come and even took the initiative to speak first. As a man, how could he be shy? Moreover, Qinyu had a very good impression of this brave girl with long eyebrows in front of him. Of course, as he had said before, this was all. But this was all. His expression was calm, his eyes were serene, and his eyes were even more serene. Although this calmness represented sincerity and calmness, it could also express some of his attitude. This long-eyebrow girl, Jiang Jue, had been a smart person since childhood. How could you not sense this? A trace of sadness appeared in her eyes. She wrinkled her nose and lightly humphed. I just want to know what your name is. I don't have any other meaning. Qinyu cupped his hands together. For Miss to know my name is already my honor. I don't dare to ask for anything more. This girl was thin-skinned, so of course he had to take care of her. Did he really want to argue with her? Even if he didn't know how to flirt, there was still a limit. Jiang Jue felt a little better, but she still felt wronged. Why did he not like her when they had only met 3 times and spoken a single sentence? She had asked for his name and also received a way out. She knew that she should turn around and leave. But for some unknown reason, it was like her feet had taken root and she couldn't move. Little Meat suddenly said, "If you don't want to leave, then sit down and drink a cup of tea. Is it comfortable to stand and be stared at?" Jiang Jue regained her composure. Her face flushed red, but she really did sit down. She looked at Yang Fanzhan and said, "Thank you." Yang Fanzhan deeply admired this Miss Jiang. He smiled and poured a cup of tea for her, saying in a soft voice, "Miss has such a good personality." Across from him, Little Meat glanced at him. Seeing the praise in Yang Fanshan's eyes, she lowered her head and continued to drink her tea. If there was anything else, she would stand up and leave. Although it would be a little troublesome, she naturally had to do what she had promised. At worst, she would just have to use a few more tricks. Yang Qianren's eyes grew colder. As he looked at the man across from Yang Fanzhan, a chill lingered in his heart. But at this time, his complexion changed as he suddenly thought of something. Qinyu. Qinyu. This name seemed somewhat familiar. Looking at the master and servants not too far away, Yang Qianren furrowed his eyebrows and his body trembled. If the name Ning Qin was spoken, it would be an illustrious name within the Western Desolate. Many people had heard of him in Songwave Tower today. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his name was like thunder piercing the ears. But the name Qinyu was so common that no one would react. This was also the reason why Qinyu had been willing to follow his heart and tell Jiang Jue his true name. But he hadn't thought that in this Songwave Tower, there would be someone who could spy on Mount Lu. True face, because accompanying a father was like accompanying a tiger. Although the pressure was great, his eyes and ears were sharp. In addition, there was a high probability of passing through the Eastern Border Army on the way to the central desolate Divine Prefecture. It was reasonable that the Eastern commander, Yang Wudi, would receive some warning. As the son of the first wife, Yang Qianren had once heard his father and close aides discuss it in the commander's tent, so he remembered it in his heart. Master and servants, and also called Qin Yu. The more he looked, the more everything seemed to fit. A trace of paleness appeared on Yang Qianren's face. As the son of the Eastern commander and a general who held real power in the army, it wasn't wrong for him to think highly of himself. He also had the qualifications to look down on everyone in Songwave Tower today. That was why he had seen through the woman's little tricks. When he looked at her, he didn't dare to conceal some of the emotions in his heart. The so-called taking, the so-called unscrupulous. But similarly, according to this logic, if someone was far above him, they could also do the same to him. The more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. The son of the Eastern commander lowered his head, his face even paler, a fine layer of sweat appearing on his forehead. But now, as Yang Qianren sank into deep fear, there was someone who didn't think so. The reluctance on Aunt Zhang's face was really very forced, almost to the point where she couldn't maintain it. This woman, who had always been a virtuous protector of the family in the prefecture city and had great intelligence, was now on the verge of collapse. Before, she had thought that her niece was the most outstanding of the next generation of the family. Not only was she beautiful, but she also had a clear mind and acted intelligently. She had placed high hopes on her. But tonight, there were all sorts of stupid moves and wrong moves, turning the originally dangerous game of chess into a dead end. Seeing Yang Qianren's head lowered in silence, his body occasionally trembling, in Aunt Zhang's eyes, of course, this true descendant of the Yang family had reached his limit. Once he exploded, the heavens and the earth would shatter. A mere Yang family could run amok in the prefecture city and make the prefectural governor bow his head in awe. What's more, he was a descendant of a Yang family from the military. Once a conflict broke out, the Jiang family would instantly lose everything they had to rely on. They would even throw stones at him when he was down, hoping to get rid of any entanglement with the Jiang family. At that time, a great disaster would come. The Jiang family, a prominent family in the prefecture city, will be blown away by the wind and rain in the blink of an eye, ending up in an incomparably tragic state. And Aunt Jiang had seen more than one or two similar incidents. It was precisely because she had seen so many that she was so terrified that she gave up her life's happiness to work hard for the survival of the family, even becoming the prefectural governor's mistress. Jiyue, Aunt Jiang stood up, trying her best to maintain her composure. After calling out to her, she said softly, "Something happened at home. We should go." Jiang Jiyue looked hesitant. She glanced at the man beside her, but before she could say anything, she heard her aunt call her again. "Jiyue, we really should go." Only those who were familiar with her aunt could sense that she seemed calm and uneasy at this moment. Jiang Jiyue was about to nod when a voice rang out from the rustling pine pavilion. "Miss Jiang, there's no need to leave." No matter what happens to the Jiang family, I guarantee nothing will happen. Aunt Zhang's face was deathly pale. Her legs gave way, and she reached out to support the table, knocking over the teacup and smashing it into pieces. Aunt, Jiang Jiyue no longer cared about anything else. She hurried over and supported the beautiful woman who had lost all color in her face. The other women at the table all widened their eyes in surprise and hesitation. Only the woman with the character Rong in her name looked pensive. She looked at the Jiang family aunt and niece in front of her with a hint of schadenfreude. She probably wanted to say, "You think you're smart, but now you've shot yourself in the foot." How satisfying. Yang Qianren didn't care about being presumptuous. If he really let the two women of the Jiang family leave in fright, because of him, he would have truly committed a crime today. He wouldn't even be able to undo it. What would he do then? What bullshit son of the Eastern Marshal? His father loved to control beautiful women his entire life. He didn't lack anything else but children. There was no need for him to do anything. As long as this matter was spread to the martial tent, his father would be the first to act. He would cut off his head and personally deliver it to him as an apology. As for his brothers in the army, they would definitely be happy to do this. The Yang family wouldn't kill each other. This was the only family rule that his father had set down, one that made one feel a trace of warmth. But to kill someone, one didn't need to personally do it. Borrowing the strength of others was clearly a better choice. Yang Qianren paled and sweat dripped down his forehead. He quickly walked over to the window and cupped his hands together. Lord Qinyu, I have eyes but failed to see. If I have offended you in any way, I ask that you forgive me. At this moment, there was a deathly silence both inside and outside the rustling pine pavilion. Chapter 16:57. Qinyu frowned. He really couldn't figure out. After a moment of hesitation, he said, Sir, did you mistake me for someone else? His body trembling, Yang Qianren fell to his knees without hesitation. My lord, please forgive me, otherwise I will die. He kowtowed, motionless. It seemed his identity had been exposed. Was it because of the name, Qinyu? Looking at Yang Qianren, Qinyu thought for a moment. You are a member of the Yang family? It was true. With these words, he couldn't be wrong. Yang Qianren respectfully said, This humble servant is Yang Qianren. My father is Yang Wudi. Qinyu nodded. Ignorance is not a crime. Leave. Yang Qianren was startled and then overjoyed. Those in high positions needed face, and his father was no exception. Today, under the watchful eyes of so many people, if he received these words, then everything would be fine. Thank you, my lord. Thank you, my lord. Yang Qianren stood up, about to withdraw from Songtao Pavilion. He didn't want to be an eyesore. This was something he was aware of. Little Meat suddenly lifted a hand and pointed at Jiang Zhiyue. You can't touch this girl. Yang Qianren lifted a hand and slapped himself in the face. He respectfully bowed to Jiang Zhiyue. Miss Jiang, from now on, wherever you are, I will stay far away. Scram. Yang Qianren left, as if he had been pardoned. The Songtao Pavilion became even more deathly silent. Even Yang Fanzhan, who had invited the three up, couldn't help but widen his eyes in shock. Little Meat looked at him and stood up. Let's go, it's almost time. Qinyu nodded. He smiled at Jiang Zhiyue and cupped his hands. The three turned and left. Yang Fanzhan clenched his teeth and chased after them. Please wait a moment. Will you also enter the past tonight? Qinyu had seen through Little Meat's intentions when he saw Yang Qianren's thoughts. He stopped and turned. Yes. Does Sir Yang wish to accompany us? Yang Fanshan's eyes brightened. Of course. Outside Songtao Pavilion, the two Yang family companions were waiting. One was a skinny old man with a goatee, and the other was a woman with dark skin. They glanced at each other and wisely maintained their silence. What had happened in the Li family was not known to ordinary people, but the Yang family was well aware of it. Even if what had happened just now had not happened, the Yang family could not afford to offend these three. However, they did not expect that the background of these three people was so powerful that even Commander Dong could not afford to offend them. Yang Fanzhan was really lucky. Yang Qianren bowed from afar, not daring to approach. His face was a little pale. The so-called instant between life and death was really just a moment's difference. If Jiang Zhiyue hadn't asked for his name just now, he would have completely cut off his way out. As he thought of this, he recalled the warning the madam had given him before she left. After watching them leave, Yang Qianren turned and entered the great pine pavilion. Arriving in front of the Jiang family niece and aunt, he cupped his hands in greeting. Please forgive me for offending the two of you before. My name is Yang Qianren. If the two of you have any trouble in the future, you can go to the Yang family in the prefecture capital and report my name. Excuse me, I'll take my leave. He turned around and left without any hesitation. Some of the thoughts in his mind were completely wiped away. Nonsense, he still dared to have such thoughts? Was he tired of living? Not to mention retreating. So what if he was willing to give up 30 times or 300 times? As the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. Yang Qianren was not lacking in this aspect. Otherwise, he would not have knelt on the ground and begged for mercy as soon as he sensed something. This could be considered a powerful survival skill. As for whether Yang Fanzan had managed to avert danger this time or had other fortuitous encounters, he did not care. But this matter had to be reported to his father as soon as possible. Regarding this, Yang Qianren did not have the slightest bit of luck. Taking the initiative to speak might be meritorious, but if he was lucky, he could avoid death, but he could not escape punishment. Leaving the Great Pine Pavilion, Yang Qianren mounted his horse and galloped away with his men. Inside the pavilion, the people who had finally recovered from their daze all had complicated expressions on their faces. No one had thought that the situation would take such a turn and suddenly turn into the current situation. Jiang Zhiyue's insight was actually much better than her astute aunt's. In a vast sea of people, they had only met once or twice from afar, but she could actually see that the man was not ordinary. A big shot, an absolute big shot. Even the great Commander Wu Di in the Eastern Border Army's tent had to be wary of him. Otherwise, as the great commander's son, Yang Qianren would not have such an attitude, almost in fear and trepidation, begging for mercy. Today, receiving Yang Qianren's promise was tantamount to putting his name in front of Eastern Commander Yang Wudi. In the future, in addition to the Yang and Li families, there would most likely be another Jiang family in the East Pole Commandery. And the Li family had been in constant turmoil recently. There was no telling what would happen in the future. Perhaps the Jiang family could seize the opportunity to replace them. Thinking of this, the people's gazes converged with more envy. Of course, there was more jealousy, but they did not dare to show it. Aunt Jiang grabbed her niece tightly. Her face was slightly flushed, and her whole body was glowing. It could be said that she was radiant. She turned her head and glanced at Jiang Zhiyue, slightly lowering her voice. "You." She seemed to be complaining, but her tone was full of pride. She was full of joy, thinking that her niece had long since discovered something but did not tell anyone. This cautiousness was, of course, excellent. Otherwise, this lucky chance would not have fallen into the Jiang family's hands. Jiang Zhiyue's lips moved, but she did not say anything. She only lowered her head. The scene of him smiling and cupping his hands appeared in her mind. "It's not because I guess you were a great figure that I looked at you differently. In the future, will we ever meet again?" She did not know, but she knew that keeping silent now was the best way for the Jiang family to obtain the most benefits. She was a smart girl, so of course she knew what to do. Thinking about it, when he cupped his hands and smiled before leaving, he had already guessed all of this and would not care at all. "Qinyu, his name is really nice. Also, my eyesight is really good. But having eyesight is also not good. Some people that I can see are destined to have no chance at all." Yang Fanzan was not stupid. On the contrary, he was smarter than most people in the world. Therefore, when he walked with the three of them, he did not say much, only chatting about the local customs and practices of the East Pole Commandery. The madam was taciturn, as if she didn't care too much about anything. After Yang Fanzan probed her a bit, he placed all of his attention on Qinyu. His words were respectful and steady, not at all out of line. He didn't know what little Meaty was planning, but he thought that this Sir Yang had some use to him. Thus, he patiently chatted with her. Since the two of them had just met, there wasn't much to say. Luckily, Pine Whistle Pavilion was located at the summit of a mountain. As they headed east, they soon arrived outside of Jade Gate Pass, avoiding the awkward situation where they had nothing to talk about. Yang Fanzan stopped on his own initiative. He cupped his hands together and said, "You three, I have an important matter to attend to, so I will be leaving first. I hope that we will meet again within the borders of the central desolate divine continent." Qinyu said, "Sir Yang, take care." He watched as the three Yang family members walked towards Jade Gate Pass. Then, he turned to look at Little Meaty. He lowered his voice and said, "Now, can you tell me just what happened?" He had gone to Pine Whistle Pavilion and nearly stirred up trouble and had even exposed his identity. But now he was letting Yang Fanzan go just to walk this short distance. He just couldn't figure it out. Meaty yawned. "I'm tired. Let's pass a bit earlier and go rest." Qinyu forced a smile. In terms of the depth of one's ability to keep others guessing. His meaty body was number one under the heavens. Shaking his head, he gathered his thoughts, stood still, and looked forward. The Jade Gate Pass was right in front of him, and the pass medallion on his body started to glow. There was also a mysterious aura that enveloped his body. It was also because of this that they were able to stand outside the Jade Gate Pass unscathed without worrying about being burned by the light. Otherwise, they would have already become human-shaped torches. At this time, there were already people waiting outside the Jade Gate Pass. The Jade Gate Pass opened once a month to accept cultivators with pass tokens into the Central Wasteland Divine Prefecture. A portion of them were people who had received special permission from the Central Wastelands or had been chosen. Another type were people from the Western Wastelands who had received permission to send them over. Finally, there were people like Master and Servant, who had identities similar to stowaways. But no matter which one it was, there was no difference. The Jade Gate Pass only looked at the token and did not recognize the person. As long as one had the pass, one could enter. In reality, this was also a display of confidence, pride, and strength. The Central Wasteland Divine Prefecture did not fear anyone entering, as long as they had the qualifications and the guts. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of drums echoed out from the Jade Gate Pass. The people waiting outside subconsciously began to stir. The Jade Gate Pass in front of them released a dazzling light that rippled like flowing water. Then, the tightly shut gate quietly opened. Qin Yu subconsciously arched an eyebrow, a trace of shock in his eyes. He saw that as the Jade Gate Pass opened, the atmosphere in front of him suddenly changed. Rich heaven and earth's spiritual strength gushed out from within, like a river bursting through a dam. It could be said that the momentum was astonishing. Not to mention anything else, just this rich spiritual strength was enough to startle one. The Central Wasteland was truly worthy of being called the Divine Prefecture. And what was even more astonishing was that this raging tide of spiritual strength seemed to be imprisoned by an invisible force. No matter how it tumbled about, it didn't leak out in the slightest. At the front of the line was a Western Wasteland person. He wore scholarly robes and had a dignified appearance. At this time, his face was flushed red and his eyes were wide with excitement. "Pass!" A low and deep voice echoed out from the Jade Gate Pass. The scholarly robed young man took a deep breath and grasped the pass token in his hand. Then he strode forwards. As he stepped into the range of the tide of spiritual strength, his entire body shook. His face flushed red and his breathing became heavy. In the next moment, lights of red, orange, yellow, and green erupted. They wove together to form the phantom of a gate, lofty and dignified, like the gates of heaven. This was the so-called carp leaping over the Dragon Gate. It was also the scene that the Jiang family's niece and aunt first wanted to see from afar. The scene in front of them could be understood as a cultivator stepping into a true cultivation holy land from a land barren of spiritual strength. Because they found it difficult to adapt to the changes in the outside environment, it caused a tide of spiritual strength to surge up. Thus, this was the result of a rainbow of colors. As for the number of colors that represented a cultivator's background, boundary, and even the upper limit of their future achievements. Naturally, there was a special testing method that was extremely accurate and rarely had any mistakes. It was set up by the Great Qin Empire in the Central Wasteland to verify those who entered, for colors was already considered extraordinary. As for the scholarly robed young man, he would likely be recruited after entering the Jade Gate Pass. And this was the reason for the carp leaping over the Dragon Gate scene. After the scholarly robed young man stabilized his footing, he had a happy expression, but there was a trace of sadness in the depths of his eyes. This was because, according to the plan, he should be able to stimulate a 5-colored halo of light. But that touch of blue never appeared. The surging heaven and earth spiritual strength around him gradually calmed down, indicating that he had gradually adapted. It was impossible for a miracle to occur again. He took a deep breath and walked into the Jade Gate Pass, his figure disappearing from everyone's sight. Although the touch of blue that the scholarly-robed young man longed for hadn't appeared, it had already been said that 4 colors was already extraordinary. As the first person to step into the Jade Gate Pass, he was absolutely the first to do so. The second person who had fallen behind had a gloomy expression, but the order had already been decided, so he could only brace himself and move forward. Red, orange, and yellow intertwined together. This wasn't bad, but with 4 colors in front of it, it wasn't conspicuous at all. After that, more and more people entered. Even the best were only 3 colors. This continued until a sickly black-clothed girl with a pale face appeared. She stepped into the tide of spiritual strength. 5 colors instantly erupted. Red, orange, yellow, green, and blue intertwined with each other. The phantom of the gate became increasingly solid and dignified. Among the 5 colors, there was even a light blue that seemed to be embellished. Although it hadn't completely condensed into form, its existence itself indicated that this sickly-looking girl had almost achieved the magnificent scene of all 6 colors descending at the same time. Are you willing to enter Golden Toad Palace to cultivate? An old woman's voice suddenly sounded out from the Jade Gate Pass, echoing in everyone's ears. It was incomparably calm and natural. It released a boundless pressure, like a towering mountain whose peak couldn't be seen at a glance. My Xinjiang Lake is willing to accept you as a direct disciple. You can enter the ancestral hall and receive the protection of the sect. Another mellow middle-aged man's voice sounded out. Outside the Jade Gate Pass, everyone's eyes were filled with burning envy. Before even stepping into the Jade Gate Pass, he was already being fought over by 2 great sects of the central desolate divine region. This had not happened for many years. The black-clothed girl was silent for a moment. Then, she respectfully said, "I'm sorry. Neither of your sides are my target." Like this, the man from Xinjiang Lake fell silent. The old woman from Golden Toad Palace coldly sneered. "Little girl, in the end you aren't one of the 6 colors. It's best if you keep your feet on the ground and don't bite off more than you can chew. Golden Toad Palace can also give you the status of a direct disciple, but that is our bottom line. You might as well consider it." The black-clothed girl only shook her head. "Humph." The old woman from Golden Toad Palace faded away. The black-clothed girl vanished from everyone's line of sight. She had actually directly rejected the recruitment of 2 sects of the central desolate divine region. Many people's eyes widened, disbelief on their faces. The 5 colors descended, suppressing this day. Afterwards, everyone was like stars in the night sky, each one of them dim. Yang Fan's Han stepped into the tide of spiritual strength and erupted with 4-colored light. After him, the 2 Yang family cultivators, the skinny old man with a goatee and the dark-skinned woman, each only had 3-colored light. As expected, the standard of judgment wasn't cultivation. As the number of people in front of him decreased, Qin Yu frowned. He glanced at Little Meaty and saw that she had a calm expression. She lightly said, "Don't worry, I've already made my preparations." Then there was nothing to worry about. Chapter 1658. Qin Yu was the first to step into the great tide of spiritual strength. His figure paused for a moment before he stood still. A faint red and orange light covered his body. Tonight, with his 5 colors suppressing everyone, even Yang Fanshan's brilliant 4 colors had become dim and dim. Qin Yu's 2 colors were like fireflies, completely unremarkable. He paused for a moment and then stepped into the Jade Gate Pass. Little Meaty followed behind. Her performance was slightly better, but she only had 3 colors. However, very few people discovered that the moment she stepped into the pass, she looked up. This glance caused a certain restless existence to fall into complete silence. It curled up into a ball and shivered, not daring to move at all. Baiji was the third to step in. 4 colors. This scene caused strange expressions to appear on the faces of the people outside the Jade Gate Pass who had yet to enter. The master and servant trio had entered, but the performance of the 2 masters was far inferior to that of a single maid. This could be called a rare situation. At the Great Pine Pavilion, looking at the Jade Gate Pass from afar, the people present all had strange expressions. The view here was excellent. There was plenty of light near the gate, and in addition to the outstanding eyesight of cultivators, everything could be seen. The master and servant trio had entered one after the other. They had high expectations, but now they were even more disappointed. For a maid to be able to follow such a great figure, it was natural that she wasn't ordinary. It was also natural for her to erupt with 4 colors. But that great figure called Qianyu only had 2 colors. Even the woman who had reprimanded Yang, Qianren, only had 3 colors. Could it be that a descendant of a great family had gone out to explore the Western Desolate? Was this why there was such a great disparity in performance between master and servant? But that wasn't right. With Eastern Commander Yang Wudi's status and strength, what second generation could make Yang Qianren feel such fear? Or could it be that this Yang family young master had made a mistake and recognized the wrong person? Although this was the least likely possibility, everyone was looking forward to it the most. Because if this was true, then there really would be a great show to watch. Jiang Jue suddenly said, "Auntie, have you heard of the fish dragon white robe?" Auntie Zhang's eyes brightened. The actions of great figures are indeed reasonable. Perhaps they have some other mission in entering the Central Desolate, so they deliberately hid their identities after coming to our East Pole County City. In order to avoid unnecessary trouble, it is reasonable for us to conceal ourselves. She glanced at the crowd and said in an indifferent tone, "As for us, since we accidentally saw something, we should keep our mouths shut to avoid the disaster comes from the mouth." Everyone's expression changed slightly, and their hearts trembled. At this moment, within the Jade Gate Pass, Great Qin's Tiger General Zhao Yuan, who was in charge of guarding the pass, frowned slightly. He put down the wine cup in his hand, stood up, and took a step forward. Ignoring the restrictive spells within the pass, he tore through space and arrived at a forbidden area. The cultivators serving here were already in chaos. Seeing the great general arrive, they hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, great general." Zhao Yuan was expressionless. What happened? An azure-robed cultivator walked out from the crowd in front of him and bowed. "Grand General, the heaven-peaking insect was suddenly startled just now. It retracted all its tentacles and fell into great panic." Zhao Yuan frowned. "Why?" The indigo-robed cultivator broke out in a cold sweat. "We have not found out yet." Zhao Yuan looked at him coldly. "Hurry up and investigate. If you can't give me an explanation, what is the point of keeping you around?" The faces of the people on the other side turned pale. They bowed and hurriedly left. Normally speaking, these people came from large sects and weren't from the army. At most, they were only cooperating with the Qin Empire and didn't need to fear the great general. But the person in front of them was different. He was a direct descendant of the Zhao family, one of the 5 great general clans of the Qin Empire. He was known to be the most ruthless and ruthless person. Over the years, he had personally killed at least 100 cultivators for various sections. Among them were even disciples of the upper 4 sections. But he still remained in the Jade Gate Pass, not causing any trouble. How could he not be afraid? Inside the Jade Gate Pass, there was another world. Standing at the peak of the East Pole Mountain, one could only see a small city from afar. It wasn't even half the size of the East Pole County City. But when one truly entered, they discovered that the sky was high and the earth was vast. Everything within 1,000 or even 10,000 miles was within the Jade Gate Pass. Taking a deep breath, heaven and earth spirit energy was as thick as water. It poured into their bodies and was instantly refined and absorbed, becoming a part of their strength. It felt like a fish that had lived in a shallow puddle had jumped into a deep lake. Only then did they realize how easy it was to breathe and how vast the world was. Qianyu finally understood why Little Meat wanted him to come to the Central Wasteland Divine Continent. It wasn't just for that matter. In terms of cultivation environment alone, the Central Wasteland Divine Continent was an important foundation for him to ascend to the Emperor realm within 30 years. And now, the entrance wasn't quiet. Many people had gathered here, divided into small circles. The cultivators who had passed the Jade Gate Pass and performed outstandingly were surrounded by many people. There were close to 100 people in the largest group, and the one who was surrounded was actually the black-clothed girl who was embellished with 5 different colors and even specks of blue light. Even though she had turned down Golden Toad Palace and Green River Lake's recruitment, that didn't mean others didn't have a chance. As the saying goes, a fine jade is right in front of you. Even if there's a chance, you have to fight for it with all your might. If you succeed, it would be a great merit. As for that scholarly rogue young man, he was no longer here. You could faintly see his fading back at the end of the street. A white-haired scholar with fluttering long sleeves was leading the way. The Confucian-robed young man respectfully followed behind with his head lowered. This was an agreement. Once he entered the central wasteland divine continent, he would be led away. It seemed that this young man would have great achievements in the future. The scholar seemed to sense something and looked back at the entrance. It seemed that his eyes weren't too good from reading all year round. He squinted his eyes, but still couldn't see the figure clearly. This caused the scholar to hesitate. He thought for a moment, shook his head, and continued forward. Since he couldn't see clearly, it meant that the time wasn't right. There was no need to look anymore. The Confucian-robed young man said, "Teacher, what are you looking at?" The white-haired scholar smiled. "An interesting little fellow. I should say very interesting." The Confucian-robed young man said, "Fate with the academy?" The white-haired scholar nodded. "There is some fate, but the time hasn't come yet." After speaking, he paused. "Mausoleum of Zhou, when you enter the academy in the future, you must learn to appreciate the word fate. This is the most essential aspect of our academy. In the future, when you travel the Central Wasteland, you will suffer less. Otherwise, I fear it will be difficult for you to pass through that road of study." Mausoleum of Zhou respectfully bowed. "Yes, teacher." One in front, one behind, the 2 scholars walked away. Qingyu looked away. The white-haired scholar turned his head. When their gazes met, Qingyu was aware of something. With just a thought, he covered it up. In such a hurry, it was better to avoid trouble. Since they had just entered the Central Wasteland, this was fate. Then, they would naturally meet again in the future. "Let's go. What is there to see?" A chubby figure appeared at Qinyu's side. She looked up at the skies, her complexion not too good. Qinyu didn't know what was wrong with her. Following the principle that it was better to avoid trouble, he simply nodded. "I'll do whatever you say." But he still couldn't smoothly leave. 2-colored or 3-colored wasn't worth mentioning and wouldn't be able to arouse the attention of the people of the Central Wasteland Divine Continent. But 4-colored, that was enough. Several figures blocked the way. Their eyes fell on Baiji. A Taoist carrying a long sword on his back bowed. "Fellow Taoist, are you willing to enter my limitless temple to cultivate? Although my status in the temple is low, I can accept a disciple on behalf of teacher. As long as you nod and agree, you will be a 4th-generation direct disciple of my limitless temple." The complexions of several people changed. They glanced at the old Taoist carrying a sword and thought that no one would dare to pretend to be someone from the limitless temple, especially a 4th-generation disciple. They couldn't help but feel helpless. They had managed to find a good seedling with great difficulty, but she was actually fancied by someone from the limitless temple. How could they compete for her? Baiji furrowed her eyebrows, not speaking. The old Taoist had a sincere expression. He slowly said, "There is no need for you to have any scruples. You only need to nod or shake your head. Since I have appeared here, I will naturally help you remove all worries." As he spoke, he swept his eyes over Qinyu and Little Meaty. Luckily, there was no arrogance or threat in his eyes. Otherwise, Qinyu felt that this old Taoist who had lived for countless years would have died today. Baiji shook her head. The old Taoist revealed an anxious expression. He took a step forwards. "You can consider it for several more days. There is no need to hurry and reply. I will be in Jade Gate Pass these days. If you change your mind, you can come find me at a mortal seeking tower at any time." After he finished speaking, he waved his hand. Without giving Baiji a chance to continue speaking, he turned and left. From the looks of it, It seemed that he feared he would be thoroughly rejected, so he left some hope for Qin Yu. Because of this old Taoist, Qin Yu's prejudice against the cultivators of the Central Wasteland suddenly lessened by a great deal. After the old Taoist left, the others glanced at each other in dismay, thinking that since they had already come, they all reported their names. Luckily, with the precedent set by the limitless temple, they didn't have any extravagant hopes of obtaining anything. They all expressed that Baiji could consider it and make a decision in the future. They all left behind their addresses and left. Misty stepped forwards and Qin Yu followed behind. Before this, when facing the old Taoist and the others, Baiji had been expressionless. But now, a trace of panic appeared in her eyes. She quickly chased after them and whispered, "Madam, I absolutely didn't have any thoughts towards you." Misty coldly sneered, "What does it have to do with me?" Baiji no longer spoke. She lowered her head. Qin Yu coughed. "I actually think that old Taoist isn't bad." Misty chuckled. She glanced at Qin Yu. "You think he's good, but what a pity, from start to finish he didn't even glance at you." Although this was indeed the case, with Misty's words, why did it feel like the situation had changed? Besides leaving people in suspense, when it came to insulting others, Misty might even be able to compete for a ranking in the world. Qin Yu shut his mouth, not speaking. It was clear that she was in a terrible mood right now, and yet she still wanted to look for trouble. Did she have a hole in her head? This little girl Baiji, she had learned to be smart. The master and servant trio left the pass. They didn't care which direction they were heading in, and simply left aimlessly. Not long after they left, Yang Fan's Han hurried over. He stood at the pass and looked around, his complexion gradually turning pale. The skinny old man with a goatee looked at the woman across from him. He frowned, puzzlement in his eyes. He also couldn't understand. This woman had always been considered smart, so why was she acting so crazily this time? The woman's skin was dark and her appearance was average, but her figure was actually quite heavy. She lowered her head in silence. As for the goatee looking at her, and Yang Fanshan's dark and gloomy expression, she pretended not to notice. Since she had done it, there was no turning back. In fact, from many years ago, she had never been able to turn back. After waiting for a long time, he still didn't find the master and servant trio. Yang Fanzan took a deep breath and turned to leave. The goatee old man turned and followed. The woman fell behind. "You stay here and don't follow me. Otherwise, I'm worried that if I fall asleep one night, my head will be separated from my body." The woman really did stop. After a moment of hesitation, she bowed and left. Chapter 1659. The reason Yang Fanzan had entered first was to wait here so that he wouldn't be separated from the master and servants. He had a favor to ask of them, so he had to be careful. As for why he didn't say anything before, it was because only here could he show them his sincerity. But he never imagined that this taciturn woman would suddenly stir up trouble. Although it wasn't serious, it was enough to delay them for a moment. Thus, the scene before them occurred. Let alone saying that it was a coincidence or that she was innocent, no one would believe it. As for the woman, she didn't hold any hope that this would happen. What was done was done. The goateed old man sighed inwardly. He wasn't willing to meddle in the internal affairs of the Yang family. As an exalted one had to have the attitude of an exalted one. One had to do what they were doing and not care about anything else. For instance, this woman had suddenly attacked today, ruining Yang Fanshan's chance to turn things around. But what about the truth? Who knew what the future would be like? Even if everything went smoothly and Yang Fanshan really died, the ones who died were still the Yang family members. As for the woman that participated in this matter, would she have a good ending? The goateed old man glanced at Yang Fanshan walking in front. He had a fairly good impression of him. But what a pity he had taken a momentary stroke of luck and wasn't able to fully grasp it. Just how difficult would it be to obtain it again? He feared things didn't bode well for him. Outside the door, Yang Fanshan wasn't there. This was beyond Qin Yu's expectations. But he was only a little surprised. He glanced at little Misty's calm and gloomy expression and then ignored her. As he followed behind her, his eyes were half closed. The majority of his mind was already focused on cultivating. In such an environment, if he didn't hurry up and cultivate, it would be a waste of heavenly treasures. After walking for a while, Yu endured it again and again. In the end, he opened his eyes and said, "Where are we going?" She said she was tired, so couldn't she hurry up and find a place to rest? He wanted to go into seclusion and cultivate right now, right now. Little Meaty humphed. "What are you in such a hurry for? We're just up ahead." Luckily, it really was in front of them. After turning a corner, a restaurant by the side of the road appeared in front of him. The words Immortal Inquiry Tower hung on the signboard. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was grand and majestic. These 3 words were like 3 huge mountains. When he looked at them, they towered into the clouds. When he looked up, he couldn't see their heads. Yu's lips twitched. Was there a need to be in such a hurry? But of course, he didn't dare to say this out loud. But it turned out that even thinking about it wasn't safe. Little Meaty turned and narrowed her eyes at him. "Yu, do you want to die?" Yu waved his hand again and again, forcefully shaking his head. He used his sincere eyes to express that he really hadn't lived long enough. Little Meaty clenched her teeth. The current Yu was becoming increasingly thick-skinned. She felt as if he were a slippery loach. He had to find a chance to make him remember, lest he forgot who the creditor was. The Immortal Seeking Tower was extremely famous. Everyone in the East Pole County knew about it. The god's nectar in the building was even more acclaimed as a sacred wine, a fine wine that people on this path absolutely could not miss. As it turned out, fame and price were also directly proportional. Luckily, before he left the East Pole County city, he had received compensation from Shiyu's store. Spending someone else's money to drink the god's nectar was naturally much better. The 2 of them sat down again. Baiji stood at the side. Yu asked her to sit down as well, so as not to draw too much attention. She shook her head. Little Meaty didn't say anything, so Yu didn't insist. Dish without mentioning lust, 2 jugs of god's nectar were delivered. Yu opened one and smelled it. His eyes brightened. It wasn't difficult to live up to its great reputation. At the very least, the fragrance of the wine was truly overflowing. Moreover, it vaguely gave him a familiar feeling. He poured a bowl of wine. The wine was clear and sweet. After drinking 2 mouthfuls, Yu frowned and looked at Little Meaty. She had only opened the jug and smelled it. She hadn't poured the wine at all. She met Yu's gaze and lightly said, "You only have the appearance but not the true essence. The current god's nectar is nothing more than a name." Yu thought deeply, but before he could nod, someone beside him said unhappily, "Miss, your tone is quite big. Immortal Inquiring Tower's god's nectar has been sold in every region of the Central Desolate for thousands of years, but no one has ever given it such an evaluation. I wonder what kind of wine Miss has drunk to dare speak like this." The one who sneered was a blue-clothed swordsman. His face was flushed red, and his eyes were blurry. It was clear he had drunk a great deal. Now that he was leaning over, his eyes were extremely sharp, like 2 invisible swords, causing the air to suddenly become a bit colder. The commotion in the restaurant instantly quieted down. Many eyes gathered on him. As the first choice of Jade Gate Pass's patrons, it was natural for powerhouses to appear here. But among these powerhouses, this blue-clothed swordsman was one of the most difficult to deal with. This person's name was Wei Han. His current status was a sword cultivator under Great General Zhao Yuan's command. It was said that he used to be part of a great sword sect, but because he had provoked a calamity, he had been expelled from his sect and ended up in his current situation. His swordsmanship was extremely high. Wei Han was addicted to drinking. Most of the money he received from the army every month ended up in this Immortal Inquiring restaurant. He had to borrow money from time to time to barely appease the alcoholic bug in his stomach. And the god's nectar was his favorite drink. If he didn't drink a pot of it every day, he would feel uncomfortable all over. Therefore, when he was drunk today, he had spoken up after hearing Xiao Rou's words. He truly couldn't tolerate such a fine wine in the world being looked down upon by a woman. Little Rogue glanced at the disheveled sword cultivator and calmly said, "Since I said this wine isn't worth mentioning, I am naturally speaking the truth." Wei Han supported himself on the table and stood up. He sneered, "Then today, I will uphold the god's nectar's reputation. Since you say it isn't worth mentioning, then bring out an even better wine to convince this way. Otherwise, I will unsheathe my sword today and leave behind several genes of mist blood as a warning to future generations." The master and servant trio remained calm. Even though there was an invisible sword intent circulating around their bodies, their expressions didn't change. No matter how strong a sovereign realm sword cultivator was, how could he touch the master and servant trio in the slightest? The onlookers weren't afraid of things getting out of hand. This was especially true after they drank some wine, so the situation became even more intense. Someone shouted. Sword Immortal Wei was truly heroic. He was willing to offer a sword to a woman for the wine in his cup. He was truly a romantic wine lover. Someone shouted, "Little miss, don't be so arrogant. If you have the ability, then bring out some good wine and peel off Great Sword Immortal Wei's face in front of everyone. Let him see what it meant that there was always someone better than the heavens, and there was wine above wine." The crowd was bubbling with noise and excitement. Qin Yu's eyebrows rose up. He swept his eyes around, thinking that the central desolate realm of gods was truly filled with outstanding people. There were more people here who didn't fear death than elsewhere. But what was Little Road doing today? It was just a mouthful of wine. Was it worth fighting over? He couldn't figure out. He felt that Little Ro's recent actions were becoming increasingly difficult to fathom. Could it be that after the crack in the world shattered, she was no longer the same as before? She was becoming more and more like a real woman? If this was the case, then there was an explanation. Little Ro glanced at Chinyu. Her eyes clearly showed that he was about to die. Chinyu hurriedly lowered his head and drank. This god's nectar only had its appearance, but it wasn't bad. He could at least drink it. Wei Han laughed. The person at the same table as you is constantly drinking, but this little girl dares to spout such nonsense. She really doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth. As Chinyu heard this, he couldn't help but put down his wine cup. He looked at him and said, "Sword Immortal, do you know how big the world is?" Wei Han's eyebrows rose up. Of course it's big. Then has Sword Immortal ever walked through it? Of course not. Wei Han revealed a mocking smile. Then, are you going to say that since you have never walked through the world, how do you know how high the heavens are and how deep the world is? Chinyu nodded. That's right. He pointed at the wine cup. I won't mention anything else, but just from this cup alone, it seems to me that you are a frog at the bottom of a well. The reason I drank a few more mouthfuls is because I spent money to buy this wine, and it is very expensive. It isn't because it tastes good. Wei Han clapped his hands. Very good. Then let's not argue. Show me the evidence, and I will immediately apologize. Kowtow and apologize. Wei Han's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand and drank a mouthful of wine. For the sake of immortal brew, so what if I have to kneel? Perhaps it will be a story to be told in the future. But tonight, if the two of you cannot produce the evidence, then don't leave. Everyone was delighted to see the conflict escalate. They couldn't help but look at Ruru with admiration. They thought to themselves that this girl really deserved to die. In addition, her expression didn't change at all. It seemed that she was very confident. TSK, I knew it. She came from a rich and powerful family. Did she really think that she could do whatever she wanted just because of the prestige of her ancestors? Don't forget, this was Jade Gate Pass. And the Grand General Zhao Yuan, who guarded the pass, was the person who cared the least about these things in this world. Were the disciples of the four upper sects amazing? Then their background could truly be said to be heaven-defying. In the central desolate divine continent, even if they couldn't do as they pleased, they could at least walk 7.5. But what were the consequences of causing trouble in our Jade Gate Pass? All of them were beheaded, their souls shattered, and their bodies and souls destroyed. They didn't even have the chance to reincarnate. What were the consequences? Nothing at all. Jade Gate Pass was still Jade Gate Pass, and Grand General Zhao Yuan was still that son of a bitch. He was still alive and kicking. This little girl didn't cover her mouth. She feared that she would suffer a great loss at Jade Gate Pass this time. To have Wei Han kneel, this had really touched his reverse scale. Even if this matter reached Zhao Yuan's ears, with the Grand General's protective nature, he wouldn't be able to obtain any good results. From the very beginning, no one believed that Ruru and Qin you were speaking the truth. Could there be wine in this world that was better than God's nectar? Moreover, it was in a place outside of our central desolate divine continent. It was clearly impossible. The manager of Immortal Seeking Tower's Jade Gate Pass bitterly smiled as he came out to mediate. He first respectfully bowed to Wei Han. Sword Immortal Wei, when Immortal Seeking Tower opens its doors to do business, what it fears the most is being embroiled in these conflicts and stirring up trouble. I wonder if you can give me face and let today's matter rest? As long as Sword Immortal Wei agrees, the debt you owe us last month will be written off. There was another uproar as everyone laughed and scolded the manager for delaying them from watching a good show. Some people even threatened that if the manager continued to spoil the mood, they wouldn't buy any more wine. The manager pretended not to hear them. A bunch of drunkards, young and old, were guarding the god's nectar card. So how could they not be restrained? If they had the ability, then don't come and drink. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.